Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. My name is Ethan Kruger, and for most of the past 6 years, I worked as a park ranger in the Superior National Forest in northeastern Minnesota. If you've never been there, imagine this. 3 million acres of dense boreal forest, over 2,000 lakes, and nature so wild that if you got lost there, no one would find you for days. Maybe never. After hearing the stories of other rangers, I decided to tell this story. Because I realized I wasn't the only one experiencing something inexplicable there. Something that keeps you awake at night, replaying in your mind, trying to make sense of what you think you saw. To be honest, I'm ready to share this with people who can truly understand. This happened during my 4th summer with the Forest Service, back in July of 2018. I was stationed at the Rainy Lake Visitor Center right up near the Canadian border. Rainy Lake is massive. It's about 60 miles long and stretches across both sides of the border, making it a popular spot for fishermen, kayakers, and campers who want to feel like they've really gotten away from civilization. And they have. Cell service is non-existent out there. The nearest town of any real size is International Falls, about 20 miles west, and even that's barely a blip on the map. The thing about working in a place like that is you get comfortable with isolation. You learn to trust your instincts, to read the weather, to know when something feels off. And that night, the night everything changed for me, something felt very, very off from the start. It had been raining for 3 days straight. Not the kind of summer shower that cools things down and moves on, but a persistent, heavy rain that turned the trails into mud slicks and made the lake look like hammered steel. When it finally stopped on the evening of July 17th, the air was thick with humidity and the smell of wet pine and decomposing leaves. Everything dripped. The forest seemed to exhale all around us, releasing 3 days' worth of pent-up moisture into the atmosphere. I was supposed to be off duty that evening, but my supervisor, a guy named Liam O'Donnell, radioed me around 7:30. Liam had been with the Forest Service for almost 20 years, and he was the kind of ranger who knew these woods better than he knew his own backyard. If Liam called you in on your day off, it was for a good reason. "Kruger, you copy?" His voice crackled through my radio, cutting through the sound of water dripping off the eaves of my cabin. "Copy, Liam. What's up?" "Need you to do a lake patrol tonight. We got a report from a couple of fishermen who came in about an hour ago. Said they saw something strange out near Dryweed Island. Probably nothing, but with the weather we've had, I want someone to check it out." I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. "What kind of strange?" There was a pause, long enough that I thought maybe the radio had cut out. Then Liam's voice came back, quieter this time. "They said they saw lights, out on the water, moving." "Lights? Like a boat?" That's what I asked. They said no. Said it didn't look like any boat they'd ever seen. Could be they were just spooked by the storm. But I'd feel better if someone took a look. I should mention here that Liam wasn't the type to get rattled easily. If he was concerned enough to send someone out after dark following a 3-day storm, then something about those fishermen's story had gotten under his skin. "All right," I said. "I'll head out now. How far out is Dryweed?" "About 4 miles northeast from the main dock. You'll want to take the patrol boat, the 14-footer with the outboard. And Kruger, keep your radio on. I want regular check-ins." That last part should have tipped me off that this wasn't routine. Liam never asked for regular check-ins unless he thought there might be trouble. I loaded up the boat with my gear: flashlight, flares, first aid kit, and my service pistol, which I wore on my belt more out of habit than any real expectation I'd need it. Most of the dangerous encounters we had were with bears, or the occasional drunk camper, not whatever these fishermen had seen out on the lake. Still, Liam's tone had made me uneasy, and I wasn't about to head out there unprepared. The sun was just starting to set as I pushed off from the dock, casting long orange streaks across the water. The lake was perfectly still, unnaturally still, actually, considering we'd just come out of a major storm. There wasn't even a breath of wind. The surface looked like dark glass, reflecting the sky and the dense wall of pines that lined the shore. I started the outboard motor and began heading northeast, following the shoreline until I could orient myself toward Dryweed Island. The sound of the motor was loud in the stillness, echoing off the water and the trees. It should have been comforting, something mechanical and human-made in all that wilderness, but instead it just made me feel more exposed, like I was announcing my presence to something that was better left alone. About 20 minutes into the trip, I radioed back to Liam. "This is Kruger. I'm about halfway to Dryweed. Everything looks normal so far. Water's calm. Copy that. Keep me posted." I throttled down as I approached the island, letting the boat drift. Dryweed Island was small, maybe half an acre of rocky outcropping covered in scrubby brush and a few stunted pines. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would camp unless they were desperate. No beach, no flat ground, just rocks and mud and mosquitoes, but it was a known navigation point for boaters, which is probably why the fishermen had been passing by when they saw whatever they saw. I cut the engine completely and let the boat drift closer, scanning the water with my flashlight. The beam cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating patches of water and the jagged rocks along the island's edge. Nothing unusual. No lights. No movement except for the gentle ripples my boat created as it drifted. I was about to radio back to Liam and tell him it was a false alarm when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe my flashlight beam reflecting off the water at an odd angle. But then I realized the light wasn't coming from my flashlight at all. It was coming from beneath the surface of the water, maybe 20 feet off the starboard side of my boat. It was a soft, greenish glow, circular in shape, about the size of a manhole cover. And it was moving. Not drifting with any current, because there was no current, but moving deliberately, tracing a slow arc through the water. I've spent enough time on lakes to know what bioluminescence looks like, and this wasn't it. Bioluminescence is diffuse, scattered, like someone sprinkled glowing dust on the water. This was concentrated, solid, and as I watched, it began to rise. My heart started pounding. I don't scare easily. You can't, in this job. But there was something deeply wrong about what I was seeing. The glow grew brighter as it ascended, and I could see now that it wasn't just a circle of light. It was a ring, a perfect ring of pale green light, rising up through the dark water like something was surfacing from the depths. I grabbed the radio. "Liam, are you there?" Static. "Liam, do you copy? I'm seeing something out here. Some kind of light in the water. It's..." The light stopped rising. It hovered just below the surface, maybe 2 or 3 feet down, and the water above it began to bulge upward, as if something massive was pressing up from underneath. But whatever it wasn't breaking the surface. It was just waiting. I reached for the ignition key, ready to fire up the motor and get the hell out of there, when the light suddenly went out. Just like that. The water flattened, the glow vanished, and I was left sitting in my boat in the near dark, surrounded by absolute silence. My hands were shaking. I tried the radio again. "Liam, if you can hear me, I'm coming back in. Something's not right out here." This time, I got a response. Sort of. The radio crackled with static, and through the noise I thought I heard Liam's voice, distant and distorted. "Copy. Stay. Position." Stay in position? Was he serious? I was about to respond when I heard it. A sound I'll never forget as long as I live. It was a low, resonant hum, like the deep note of a cello played underwater. It seemed to come from all around me, vibrating through the hull of the boat and up through my bones. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, staring at the spot where the light had been. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Eventually, I forced myself to start the motor. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence, and I swung the boat around, pointing it back toward the visitor center. That's when I saw the second light. This one was behind me, further out on the lake, maybe 100 yards away. It was the same pale green color, the same circular shape, but bigger. Much bigger. And it wasn't alone. As I watched, 2 more lights appeared, then 3, then 5, all of them rising slowly from the depths and forming a loose pattern on the surface, almost like they were surrounding me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I gunned the throttle and took off, the boat's bow lifting as it accelerated. The lights didn't follow me. At least, I don't think they did. I didn't look back. I just kept my eyes fixed on the distant glow of the visitor center and prayed the motor wouldn't cut out. When I finally reached the dock, Liam was there waiting for me. He looked pale, even in the dim light of the dock lamps. "Did you see it?" he asked, before I'd even tied off the boat. I nodded, still catching my breath. "Yeah, I saw it." "What the hell was that?" He shook his head. "I don't know, but you're not the first person to report lights out there. And something else happened while you were gone." "What?" He gestured toward the visitor center. "Come inside. You need to see this." I followed him into the building, my legs still unsteady from the adrenaline. Inside, he led me to his office and pulled up something on his computer, a grainy, black and white image from one of the security cameras we had mounted on the dock. "This was recorded about 10 minutes ago," he said, "right around the time you radioed in." The image showed the dock, empty except for a few boats tied up along the edge. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, something moved in the water. It was hard to make out in the low resolution, but it looked like a dark shape. Something large, gliding just beneath the surface. It passed under the dock and disappeared off screen. "What was that?" I asked. Liam zoomed in on the image, enhancing it as much as the software would allow. "I have no idea, but whatever it is, it's big, and it's been hanging around the dock ever since you left." We both stared at the screen for a long moment. Finally, I asked the question I'd been dreading. "Should we report this?" Liam sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Report what? That we saw some lights and a shadow on a security camera? You know how that's going to sound." He was right. Without any physical evidence, we'd just look like a couple of spooked rangers who'd let their imaginations run wild. And in the Forest Service, that kind of reputation could follow you for the rest of your career. "So what do we do?" I asked. He thought about it for a moment, then said, "We keep an eye on things. If it happens again, if anyone else reports seeing something, then we'll escalate it. But for now, we keep this between us." I didn't like it, but I understood his reasoning, so I agreed. That night, I went back to my cabin, but I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those lights rising from the water, forming that strange pattern on the surface. And I kept thinking about that sound, the deep, resonant hum that had vibrated through my entire body. What was it? Some kind of underwater vehicle? A natural phenomenon we didn't understand? Or something else entirely? Something that had no business being in Rainy Lake? I didn't have any answers. And as the night wore on, I started to realize that maybe I didn't want any. But the thing is, the story doesn't end there. Because the next morning, When I went down to check on the patrol boat, I found something that made my blood run cold. The boat was still tied to the dock where I'd left it, but the inside was soaking wet. Not from rain, because it hadn't rained overnight, and not from lake water splashing in because the boat had been covered with a tarp. No, this was different. The seats, the floor, even the steering wheel were drenched, as if someone, or something, had climbed inside and dripped water all over everything. And there, on the floor of the boat, I found something else. A single, wet footprint. But it wasn't human. It was too large, for one thing, easily twice the size of my own boot print, and the shape was wrong. Instead of the familiar outline of a shoe or a bare foot, this print had long, webbed toes that splayed out in a way that reminded me of a frog's foot, but scaled up to a horrifying size. I stood there staring at it, my mind racing. Had something climbed into my boat during the night? Something from the lake? I took a photo of the print with my phone, but when I looked at the image later, it was too blurry to make out any details. The morning sun had already started drying out the boat, and within an hour, the footprint had evaporated completely, leaving no trace that it had ever been there. I showed Liam the photo anyway, but even I had to admit it didn't prove anything. He looked at it for a long time, his expression unreadable, then handed my phone back to me. "Maybe it was a bear," he said, though we both knew that was ridiculous. "Yeah," I said, "maybe." But I knew the truth. Something had been in my boat, something that had come out of Rainy Lake, and whatever it was, it had been watching me. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. The lights, the sound, the footprint, it was all just stress and exhaustion and an overactive imagination. But then the reports started coming in. First, it was a group of kayakers who said they'd seen strange lights near the Brule Islands, about 8 miles east of Dryweed. They described them the same way I would have: pale green, circular, moving beneath the surface. Then a fishing guide reported that his clients had heard a low humming sound while they were out near the Cranberry Islands. He'd tried to tell them it was just the wind, but even he didn't sound convinced. Liam and I compared notes, and it became clear that whatever was happening on Rainy Lake, it wasn't isolated to one area. The sightings were spread out across the entire eastern section of the lake, always at dusk or after dark, always near the deeper channels where the lake bed dropped off into darkness. "We need to figure out what this is," I told Liam one afternoon as we stood on the dock, looking out over the water. "People are starting to talk. If this keeps up, someone's going to get hurt, or worse." He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking the same thing. But I don't know where to start. It's not like we can just dive down there and take a look." Actually, we could. The Forest Service had access to underwater survey equipment. Nothing fancy, but enough to get a basic look at what was going on beneath the surface. The problem was, using that equipment required approval from higher-ups, and Liam wasn't sure he wanted to explain why we needed it. "What if we go out there ourselves?" I suggested. "Just you and me. We take one of the boats, bring some diving gear, and see if we can find anything." Liam looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You want to go diving in Rainy Lake? At night? After everything we've seen?" "Not at night," I said quickly. "During the day, when it's safe. Whatever's out there, it only seems to show up after dark. If we go during daylight, maybe we can find some clue about what it is, or where it's coming from." He thought about it for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But we tell someone where we're going, and we bring a radio, flares, the works. I'm not taking any chances." 2 days later, we set out in the early morning, just as the sun was beginning to burn off the mist that clung to the lake's surface. The water was calm, reflecting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful, almost peaceful, and for a moment I let myself forget about the lights and the footprint. and the sound that still haunted my dreams. We headed straight for Dryweed Island, the site of my first encounter. Liam brought along a handheld sonar device, the kind fishermen use to locate schools of fish, and as we approached the island, he started scanning the water. "Anything?" I asked. He frowned at the screen. "Yeah, actually. There's something down there, about 40 feet deep. It's big, really big, and it's not moving." My pulse quickened. "Can you tell what it is?" "Not from this. We'd need to get closer, or—" He trailed off, looking at the diving gear we'd brought along. "Or we go down there," I finished. He nodded. "You ever done any wreck diving?" I had, actually. I'd gotten my certification a few years earlier, mostly for fun, but I'd done a few dives in Lake Superior to explore old shipwrecks. Rainy Lake wasn't as deep as Superior, but 40 feet was still deep enough to be dangerous if something went wrong. "I'll do it," I said. "But you're staying in the boat. If something happens, I need you up here to pull me out." Liam didn't argue. He helped me get suited up, wetsuit, tank, regulator, fins, and I went over the dive plan one more time. I'd descend to 40 feet, take a quick look at whatever was down there, then come back up. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. In and out. I sat on the edge of the boat, adjusted my mask, and rolled backward into the water. The lake was cold, shockingly cold, even through the wetsuit, and visibility was terrible. The storm had stirred up a lot of sediment, and I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. I descended slowly, using my flashlight to cut through the murk, and tried to ignore the way my heartbeat sounded in my ears, amplified by the regulator. At 20 feet, the water grew darker. At 30, it was almost black. My flashlight beam was the only thing that kept me oriented, and I focused on the rocky lake bed below, searching for whatever the sonar had picked up. At 40 feet, I found it. It was a structure, or at least that's the only word I can think of to describe it. It looked like a ring of stones, each one about the size of a car, arranged in a perfect circle on the lake bed. They were covered in algae and sediment, but there was no mistaking the deliberate pattern. Someone, or something, had placed those stones there. I swam closer, my light sweeping over the structure. In the center of the ring, the lake bed dropped away into a deep hole, like a sinkhole or a cave entrance. I couldn't see how far down it went, but the water coming out of it was noticeably warmer than the surrounding lake, as if there was a thermal vent or spring down there. And then I saw the carvings. They were etched into the stones, symbols and patterns that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. They weren't Native American pictographs, which I was familiar with from other sites in the region. These were different, geometric, almost mechanical. I was so focused on the carvings that I almost didn't notice the movement in the hole. But when I shone my light down into the darkness, I saw it, something large, shifting in the depths. And then 2 eyes, pale, luminous eyes, stared back at me from the blackness. I didn't think. I just kicked hard, propelling myself upward as fast as I could without risking decompression sickness. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, and every instinct told me that something was coming up behind me, something that had been waiting down there in the dark. I broke the surface gasping, ripping off my mask, and Liam was already reaching down to pull me into the boat. "What happened?" he shouted. "What did you see?" "Drive," I yelled. "Just drive. Get us out of here." He didn't ask questions. He just started the motor and gunned it, and we were halfway back to the visitor center before I could even catch my breath enough to tell him what I'd found. When I finally did, when I described the stone ring, the carvings, the hole in the lake bed, and those eyes, Liam went pale. "We need to report this," he said. "This is bigger than us." But who were we supposed to report it to? The police? The FBI? The Forest Service higher-ups who would probably just think we were crazy. In the end, we decided to document everything we could. Liam pulled up maps of the lake bed, and we marked the location of the stone ring. I sketched the symbols I'd seen on the stones, trying to recreate them from memory. And we started searching online for anything, any historical records, legends, or scientific studies that might explain what we'd found. That's when we stumbled across the stories. Apparently, Rainy Lake had a history we hadn't known about. Long before it became a popular recreation area, the Ojibwe people who lived in the region believed the lake was sacred and dangerous. According to their oral traditions, there were places in the lake that should never be disturbed. Places where the boundary between the world of the living and the world of spirits was thin. And there were stories about something that lived in the deepest parts of the lake. The Ojibwe called it Mishibijiu, the Great Lynx, a powerful water spirit that could bring both blessings and destruction. But the descriptions didn't match the traditional depictions of Mishibiju that we found in books. This version was described as something that glowed, something that made sounds like thunder, something that could pull people down into the depths and hold them there forever. The more we read, the more uneasy I became, because it sounded an awful lot like what I'd seen. But there was one detail that stuck with me, something that an elder had said in an interview recorded back in the 1970s. The lights in the water are not there to guide you. They are there to call you, and if you answer, you will never come back. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about the stone ring, the carvings, and those eyes staring up at me from the darkness. What had I seen down there? Was it some kind of animal, something unknown to science, lurking in the depths of Rainy Lake? Or was it something else, something that didn't fit into any category I could understand? Around 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went outside. The night was clear and cool, and the stars were so bright they almost hurt to look at. I walked down to the dock and stood there staring out at the lake. It was perfectly still. No wind, no waves, no sound except for the occasional call of a loon in the distance. And for a moment, I felt a strange sense of peace, as if the lake was trying to tell me something. Then I saw the lights again. They were far out on the water, maybe half a mile away, rising up from the depths in that same slow, deliberate way. 1, then 2, then 5, then 10. They formed a pattern, a circle, just like the stone ring I'd seen on the lake bed, and they glowed with that eerie, pale green light. I stood there, transfixed, as the lights began to move. They didn't drift randomly. They moved in unison, tracing a path across the water, and I realized with a start that they were coming toward the dock. Toward me. I should have run. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get away, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever was out there. But I couldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, hypnotized by the lights. They came closer and closer, until they were just offshore, maybe 30 feet from where I stood, and then they stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. The lights just hovered there, pulsing gently, and I could hear that sound again, the low, resonant hum that vibrated through my bones. And then, one by one, the lights began to sink. They descended slowly, fading back into the depths, until the last one disappeared and the lake was dark again. I don't know how long I stood there after they were gone. Eventually, I became aware that I was shaking, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something primal. Whatever those lights were, they had been trying to communicate, and I had no idea what they were trying to say. The next morning, I went to Liam's office and told him what I'd seen. He didn't look surprised. "I saw them too," he said quietly, "from my cabin, and I think I think we need to stop looking into this." "What? Why?" He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. "Because I don't think we're supposed to know. Whatever's out there, it's been there for a long time, probably longer than we can imagine. And maybe it's better if we just leave it alone." I wanted to argue with him, but part of me knew he was right. We were out of our depth, literally and figuratively. We didn't have the resources or the expertise to deal with something like this, and trying to force the issue could end badly. For us, and for anyone else who got involved. "So, what do we do?" I asked. "We keep people away from that part of the lake," Liam said. "We tell them it's unsafe, unstable lake bed, risk of sinkholes, whatever excuse we need to use, and we hope that's enough." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the only one that made sense. We put up warning signs around Dryweed Island and the surrounding areas, citing hazardous underwater conditions and advising boaters to stay clear. Most people listened. A few asked questions, but we gave them the standard bureaucratic runaround, and eventually they moved on to other parts of the lake. For a while, things seemed to calm down. The reports of lights and strange sounds dropped off, and I started to think that maybe, just maybe, we'd done the right thing by leaving it alone. But then, in late August, something happened that changed everything. A family was camping on one of the small islands near the eastern shore, not far from where I'd seen the lights that first night. They'd set up their tent, built a fire, and were settling in for the night when their 8-year-old daughter wandered down to the water's edge to wash her hands. She never came back. Her parents found her about 10 minutes later, standing knee-deep in the water, staring out at the lake. She wasn't moving, wasn't responding to their calls. She just stood there, perfectly still, her eyes fixed on something they couldn't see. When her father waded out and physically pulled her back to shore, she started screaming, not in fear or pain, but in frustration, like she was being torn away from something she desperately wanted. They packed up immediately and drove straight to the visitor center where they filed a report and demanded to know what was wrong with the lake. The father was furious, insisting that we weren't doing enough to protect visitors, while the mother just sat there, holding her daughter, who had finally stopped screaming but was still staring blankly into space. Liam and I tried to calm them down, but it was clear that something had affected the girl. She wasn't injured, but she wasn't quite there either. It was like part of her was still out on the lake, drawn to whatever she'd seen in the water. We convinced the family to take her to a hospital in International Falls, and we promised we'd look into it. But after they left, Liam and I just sat there in silence, knowing exactly what had happened. The lights had called to her, and she'd almost answered. "We can't ignore this anymore," I said. "That girl could have drowned." Liam nodded slowly. "I know. But what are we supposed to do? Close the entire lake? Tell people there's some kind of entity out there that hypnotizes children? We have to do something." He thought about it for a long time, then said, "All right, I'll make some calls. There's a guy I know, retired archaeologist, used to work with the tribes in this area. If anyone knows about the history of this lake, it's him. Maybe he can give us some answers." The archaeologist's name was Dr. William Mackenzie, and he agreed to meet with us the following week. He was in his 70s, with a weathered face, and the kind of quiet intensity that comes from spending decades studying things most people don't believe in. We met him at a coffee shop in International Falls, and Liam laid out everything we'd seen. The lights, the stone ring, the carvings, the stories about Mishibijiu. Dr. Mackenzie listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Liam finished, the old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You found the threshold." "The what?" I asked. "The threshold," he repeated. "The Ojibwe have stories about places like that, places where the physical world and the spirit world overlap. They're usually marked by stone structures, and they're always near water. The one on Rainy Lake is one of the oldest and most powerful. So, what we saw down there, it's real? Liam asked. Dr. Mackenzie nodded. As real as anything else in its own way. The spirits that inhabit those places aren't malevolent exactly, but they're not benign either. They exist according to rules we don't understand, and when we cross those thresholds, intentionally or not, we're subject to those rules. What kind of rules? I asked. The lights are an invitation, he explained, or a test, depending on how you look at it. If you follow them, if you answer their call, you pass into their world. And once you're there, coming back is difficult. Has anyone ever come back? Liam asked. Dr. Mackenzie hesitated. There are stories, but the people who return are never quite the same. They talk about seeing things, experiencing things that don't fit into our understanding of reality. Some of them spend the rest of their lives trying to get back. Others just fade away. I thought about the little girl, standing in the water, screaming when her father pulled her back. How do we stop it? How do we keep people safe? You can't stop it, Dr. Mackenzie said bluntly. The threshold has been there for thousands of years, and it will be there for thousands more. All you can do is keep people away from it, and hope that's enough. That's it? I asked, frustrated. We just accept that there's this thing out there that could kill someone, and we don't do anything about it? What would you do? He asked, his gaze steady. Dynamite the stone ring? Try to close the threshold? You have no idea what that would unleash. The spirits that guard that place have been contained, for lack of a better word, by the structure itself. If you destroy it, you might free something far worse. Liam and I exchanged a look. Neither of us liked the answer, but we both knew he was right. After we left the coffee shop, we drove back to the visitor center in silence. The weight of what we'd learned hung over us like a storm cloud, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in way over our heads. But there was one more thing I needed to do. That night, I went back to the dock, alone. I know it was stupid, reckless even, but I needed to see the lights one more time. I needed to understand what had called to me, what had almost claimed that little girl. I sat on the edge of the dock and waited. The lake was calm, the sky clear, and the stars reflected on the water like scattered diamonds. And then, right on cue, the lights appeared. They rose from the depths one by one, forming that familiar circle pattern. But this time I didn't feel fear. I felt curiosity, longing even. The lights pulsed gently, and that low hum filled the air, resonating through my chest. And I understood. The lights weren't trying to hurt me. They were just there, existing in a way that I couldn't fully comprehend. They were an invitation to step outside the boundaries of the world I knew, to experience something beyond the limits of human understanding. But I also understood what Dr. Mackenzie had said. If I followed those lights, I might never come back. Or if I did, I wouldn't be the same person I was now. So I stayed where I was. I watched the lights until they sank back into the depths, and then I went back to my cabin and slept for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I submitted my resignation to the Forest Service. I'd already been thinking about moving on, maybe going back to school, starting a new career. But after everything that had happened on Rainy Lake, I knew I couldn't stay. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew that if I stayed, I'd eventually give in to the call. And I wasn't ready for that. Liam understood. Hell, he admitted that he'd thought about doing the same thing himself. But someone had to stay, he said. Someone had to keep watch over the lake, to make sure that what happened to that little girl didn't happen to anyone else. I left Minnesota in early September, and I haven't been back since. I keep in touch with Liam every now and then. Emails mostly, the occasional phone call. He tells me the lake is quiet, that there haven't been any more incidents. But he also tells me the lights are still there, rising from the depths every night, waiting for someone to answer their call. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about going back. I think about standing on that dock again, watching those pale green lights form their perfect circle on the water. I think about what it would be like to follow them, to step across that threshold and see what's on the other side. But then I remember Dr. Mackenzie's words. The people who return are never quite the same. And I realize that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some doors are better left unopened. Because once you cross that threshold, there's no guarantee you'll ever find your way back. I still dream about Rainy Lake sometimes. I dream about the lights, the stone ring, those luminous eyes staring up at me from the darkness. And I dream about the sound, that low, resonant hum that seems to echo through my bones even now, years later. I don't know what's down there in the depths of that lake. I don't know if it's a spirit, a creature, or something else entirely, something that exists outside the boundaries of what we consider possible. But I do know one thing. It's still there, waiting. And if you ever find yourself on Rainy Lake after dark, and you see pale green lights rising from the water, do yourself a favor. Don't follow them. Don't try to understand them. Just turn around, get back to shore, and never look back. Because some invitations aren't meant to be accepted. Some calls aren't meant to be answered. And some places, no matter how beautiful they seem, are better left alone. My name is Ethan Kruger. I used to be a ranger in the Superior National Forest. And this is the story of the night on Rainy Lake that I'll never forget. The night I learned that there are things in this world that exist beyond our understanding, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. If you've ever had an experience like mine, if you've ever seen something in the wilderness that you can't explain, I hope you'll share it, because I've realized something over the years. We're not meant to face these mysteries alone. And the more we talk about them, the more we share our stories, the less power they have over us. Or maybe I just tell myself that to feel better. Either way, I'm done with Rainy Lake. I'm done with those lights and that sound, and the feeling that something vast and unknowable is watching from beneath the surface. But I'll never forget it. And neither will Liam, or that little girl, or anyone else who's ever answered the call of the lights on Rainy Lake. We're all marked now, all connected to that place, to that threshold between worlds. And sometimes I wonder if that connection ever really goes away, or if it just waits, dormant, until the day we finally give in and go back. I hope I never find out. 3 years have passed since I left Minnesota. I've built a new life for myself in Colorado, a state with its own mountains and forests, but none of them feel quite the same as the woods around Rainy Lake. I work for the Parks Department here, mostly doing administrative work, pushing papers, attending meetings. It's safe, predictable, boring. But boring is what I need. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself until last month when I got a call from Liam. It was late evening, and I was just finishing up dinner when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I'd been bad about keeping in touch, and part of me felt guilty every time I saw his name pop up on my screen. But something made me pick up. "Ethan," he said, and I could hear the tension in his voice immediately. "I need to tell you something." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "There's been another incident, a bad one." I sat down heavily on my couch. "Tell me." He took a deep breath, and I could hear him collecting his thoughts. "You remember Jake Torres? Young ranger, started about a year after you left." I did remember Jake. Good kid, maybe 25, enthusiastic about the work. Yeah, I remember him. What about him? He's missing. The word hung in the air between us. Missing. In ranger work, that word carries a special kind of weight. Missing could mean a lot of things, and most of them weren't good. What happened? I asked quietly. He was doing a night patrol near Dryweed Island. Said he wanted to check on the area, make sure the warning signs were still up. I told him not to go alone, but Liam trailed off. He didn't come back. We found his boat the next morning, drifting near the south shore. Engine was still running. All his gear was there, radio, flashlight, even his jacket. But Jake was gone. Did you search the water? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We brought in divers, search dogs, the whole operation. We've been looking for 3 weeks now, Ethan. There's no sign of him. It's like he just vanished. I closed my eyes, and I could see it in my mind. Jake standing on his boat, seeing those lights rise from the water. Maybe he'd been curious like I was. Maybe he'd wanted to understand. Or maybe he'd just gotten too close, and the lights had done what they always did. Called to him, drawn him in. There's something else, Liam continued. Before he disappeared, Jake left a voicemail on my phone. It was 2:47 in the morning. I was asleep, didn't hear it come in, but when I listened to it the next day, he paused. Ethan, you need to hear this. Can you send it to me? I asked. I already did. Check your email. I put Liam on speaker and opened my laptop, pulling up my email. There it was, a message from Liam with an audio file attached. I clicked it, and Jake's voice filled my living room. At first, there was just static and background noise, wind maybe, or the sound of water. Then Jake started speaking, his voice low and urgent. Liam, I'm out near Dryweed. I saw them, the lights. They're here, right under my boat, and they're beautiful. God, I've never seen anything like this. They're forming patterns, like they're trying to tell me something. I think I need to go down there. I need to see what they are. There was a pause, and I could hear that sound in the background. The low, resonant hum I remembered so well. I know you told me to stay away, Jake continued, but I can't. I have to know. I have to understand. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't come back. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think this is where I'm supposed to be. The voicemail ended there. Just cut off, mid-thought. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, my hands shaking. Jesus Christ, Liam. I know, he said quietly. And that's not all. We found something when we were searching his boat. A notebook. Jake had been documenting everything. The lights, the stone ring, even that interview with Dr. Mackenzie. He'd tracked down the old man and talked to him about the threshold, about the spirits. And at the end of the notebook, there was a drawing. A drawing of what? The symbols. The ones you saw carved into the stones. Jake had copied them all down, along with notes about what he thought they meant. He'd been researching them, trying to decode them, and I think he figured something out. What did he figure out? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Liam was quiet for a long moment. He thought the symbols were coordinates, not geographical coordinates, but something else. A way of marking the threshold, of identifying it to whoever or whatever is on the other side. He thought that if someone could understand the symbols, they could use them to cross over intentionally, to go through the threshold without just being called by the lights. And you think that's what he did? I asked. You think he went through? I don't know what else to think, Liam said. We've searched everywhere, Ethan. There's no body, No evidence that he drowned or got injured. It's like he just stepped off his boat and disappeared, and the only explanation that makes sense is that he went into the lake and didn't come back out. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that there had to be another explanation. But I couldn't, because I knew Jake had done exactly what Liam thought he'd done. He'd figured out how to cross the threshold, and he'd gone through. Willingly. "I'm sending you a copy of his notebook," Liam said. "I know you're not a ranger anymore, and I know you've moved on. But I thought you should see it. You were there when this all started. You saw the lights before any of us. If anyone can make sense of what Jake found, it's you." "Liam, I don't know if I—" "Just look at it," he interrupted. "Please. I need to know if there's anything in there that can help us find him, or at least understand what happened to him." I agreed, and we hung up shortly after. A few minutes later, my email pinged again with a message containing scanned pages from Jake's notebook. I hesitated before opening it, my cursor hovering over the attachment. Part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend I'd never gotten the call, to go back to my safe, boring life in Colorado, but I couldn't do that. Jake was missing because of something I'd helped uncover. If there was any chance I could help find him, or at least give his family some closure, I had to try. I opened the file and started reading. Jake's handwriting was neat and methodical, the kind of precise script you'd expect from someone who took their work seriously. The first few pages were just observations, dates and times when he'd seen the lights, descriptions of their behavior, notes about water temperature and weather conditions. Standard ranger documentation. But as I scrolled through the pages, his notes became more speculative. He'd interviewed Dr. Mackenzie, just like Liam had said, and the old archaeologist had told him things he hadn't shared with us, or maybe things we hadn't thought to ask about. According to Dr. Mackenzie, the threshold on Rainy Lake wasn't unique. There were dozens of similar sites scattered across North America, all marked by stone structures and associated with legends of spirits or otherworldly beings. The Ojibwe had known about them for centuries, and they'd developed protocols for interacting with them, rituals and ceremonies designed to appease the spirits and maintain the boundary between worlds. But over time, as the old ways were forgotten and the land was colonized, those protocols fell out of practice. The thresholds remained, but without the proper ceremonies to contain them, they became unstable. The boundaries grew thinner, and the spirits, or whatever they were, became more active, reaching out into our world in ways they hadn't before. Jake had theorized that the symbols carved into the stones were a kind of language, a way of communicating with whatever existed on the other side of the threshold. And he'd spent months trying to decode them, comparing them to other indigenous languages and symbols from around the world. On the last page of the notebook, he'd written something that made my blood run cold. "I think I understand now. The lights aren't a threat. They're an opportunity, a chance to see beyond the limits of our reality, to experience something that most people will never even know exists." Dr. Mackenzie was wrong when he said the people who cross over never come back the same. They don't come back the same because they've seen the truth. And once you've seen it, there's no going back to the lie. I'm going through, tonight. I don't expect anyone to understand, but I need to do this. I need to know what's on the other side. And if I don't come back, well, at least I'll have seen something real. Below that, he'd drawn one final symbol, a complex geometric pattern that looked like a combination of a spiral and a star. And underneath it, he'd written a single word, Gateway. I stared at the page for a long time, trying to process what I was reading. Jake hadn't been dragged into the lake or hypnotized by the lights. He'd chosen to go. He'd figured out how to cross the threshold, and he'd walked through it willingly, believing he was going to discover some kind of ultimate truth. But was he right? Or had he just doomed himself to whatever fate awaited those who crossed over? I didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at me for days. I tried to go back to my normal routine: work, gym, the occasional dinner with friends, but I couldn't stop thinking about Jake's notebook, about those symbols and what they might mean, about the possibility that there really was something on the other side of that threshold, something beyond our understanding of reality. And then, one night, I had a dream. I was back on Rainy Lake, standing on the dock just like I had 3 years ago. The water was perfectly still, and the lights were there, rising from the depths in that familiar pattern. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I felt drawn to them, compelled to walk towards them. I stepped off the dock and into the water, and it was warm, impossibly warm, like a bath. I waded deeper, the water rising to my waist, then my chest, then my shoulders. And as I sank beneath the surface, I saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't lights. They were beings, figures made of pure luminescence, their forms shifting and flowing like liquid. They surrounded me, and I could feel them communicating, not with words, but with emotions and images that flooded my mind. I saw other worlds, places that existed alongside ours but in dimensions we couldn't perceive. I saw people who had crossed the threshold before, living in those spaces between realities. And I saw Jake, alive and smiling, standing among the lights as if he'd finally found where he belonged. Then, one of the beings reached out to me, and I felt its touch, cold and electric and utterly alien. And it showed me one final image, myself, standing on the shore of Rainy Lake with a choice to make. I could turn away, go back to my life, and never think about the threshold again. Or I could step forward, cross over, and see what lay beyond. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. It was 3:17 in the morning, and my apartment was dark and silent. But I could still feel the presence of those beings, still see their luminous forms in my mind's eye. And I knew with absolute certainty that the dream hadn't been just a dream. It had been a message, an invitation. The lights were calling to me just like they'd called to Jake, and I had to decide, would I answer? My name is Mara Jensen, and I need to tell you about something that happened during my second summer as a ranger with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. I've been sitting on this story for almost 4 years now, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself there's a logical explanation for what I saw. But the more time passes, the more I realize that some things don't have logical explanations. Some things just are. This happened in August of 2019 in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, about as remote as you can get in Minnesota without crossing into Canada. If you're not familiar with the BWKADW, imagine over 1 million acres of pristine wilderness, more than 1,000 lakes, and enough isolation to make you feel like you're the last person on Earth. It's beautiful in a way that almost hurts to look at, especially during sunset when the light turns the water into liquid gold and the loons start their haunting calls across the lakes. I was stationed out of the Sawbill Lake entry point that summer, working with another ranger named Sophie Clark. Sophie had been with the DNR for about 5 years, and she was the kind of person who seemed born for the job. Tough, competent, and completely at ease in the wilderness. She taught me most of what I know about backcountry ranging, and I trusted her judgment completely, which is why, when she told me we needed to check on Camp 14, I didn't question it even though something about the assignment felt off from the start. Camp 14 was an old youth camp that had been abandoned back in the early 2000s. The DNR had taken over management of the land after the camp shut down, but we'd never gotten around to actually removing the structures. They were supposed to be demolished years ago, but budget cuts and bureaucratic red tape meant they just sat there, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Most rangers avoided the place. There were rumors about it, the usual small-town gossip about why the camp had really closed, stories about kids going missing, counselors who'd seen things in the woods. I'd always written it off as the kind of legend that grows around any abandoned place, especially one that used to serve children. People love a good ghost story. But Sophie took it more seriously. She'd grown up in the area, and she'd told me once that her older sister had been a counselor at Camp 14 the summer before it closed. Her sister never talked about what happened that final summer, but whatever it was, it had been bad enough that she'd left Minnesota entirely and never come back. "We need to do a sweep of the camp," Sophie told me on the morning of August 12th. We were sitting in the ranger station, sipping coffee and looking at the duty roster. "There's been some activity out there." "What kind of activity?" I asked. She showed me some photos on her phone. They'd been submitted by a couple of kayakers who'd paddled past the camp a few days earlier. The images showed the old dock, some of the cabins, and the main lodge building. But what caught my attention was the last photo, smoke rising from what looked like a campfire. "Someone squatting there?" I asked. Sophie shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe someone just doesn't know the camp is off limits. Either way, we need to check it out. Make sure they're not damaging the property or starting fires that could spread." It made sense. We got our share of campers who wandered off the designated sites, especially during peak season. But something about Sophie's expression told me this wasn't just a routine compliance check. "Is there something else?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "My sister called me last night. First time in almost 15 years. She said she'd heard someone was at the camp, said I needed to go out there and make sure everything was okay." "How would she know if someone was there?" I asked. "She's in Oregon, right?" "California, and I don't know how she knew. But when I told her we'd check it out, she said something that's been bothering me." Sophie looked at me, and I saw genuine worry in her eyes. She said, "Don't go inside any of the buildings, and whatever you do, don't let them show you the lake." A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? I have no idea, but we're going anyway. I need to see what's going on out there. We loaded up our patrol boat and headed out around 9 in the morning. The sky was overcast, heavy with the threat of rain, and the air had that thick, humid quality that makes your clothes stick to your skin. The lake was calm, though. Eerily calm, actually. No wind, no waves, just that glassy surface that makes it look like you're traveling across a mirror. Camp 14 was about 45 minutes by boat from the ranger station, tucked into a small bay on the north shore of Little Saginaga Lake. As we approached, I could see the old dock jutting out into the water, the wood gray and weathered but still mostly intact. Behind it, the camp buildings emerged from the trees like something out of a dream, or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. There were 8 cabins arranged in a semicircle around a central clearing, with the lodge building at the far end. Each cabin had probably housed 6 to 8 kids back in the day, and I could still see the faded paint on the doors where names and dates had been carved into the wood. The lodge was bigger, a 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and windows that stared out at us like empty eyes. And in the middle of it all, in the fire pit at the center of the clearing, I could see the remains of a recent fire. "Well," Sophie said as we tied off the boat, "someone's definitely been here." We climbed onto the dock, and I noticed something immediately. The silence. In the wilderness, there's always sound, birds, wind in the trees, insects, the lap of water against the shore. But here, there was nothing. Just an oppressive, suffocating quiet that made my ears ring. "You feel that?" I asked Sophie. She nodded. Yeah, something's wrong here. We approached the fire pit slowly, our boots making soft sounds on the packed dirt. The ashes were still warm. I could feel the heat radiating off them when I held my hand a few inches above the surface. Whoever had been here, they hadn't left more than a few hours ago. But that wasn't the strangest thing. Scattered around the fire pit were signs of recent habitation: empty food wrappers, a couple of water bottles, a small stack of firewood. And on one of the picnic tables near the lodge, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. Comic books. A stack of them, maybe 5 or 6 issues, laid out carefully on the table, as if someone had been reading them and just stepped away for a moment. They were old. I could see the yellowed pages and faded covers from where I stood, and they looked like they'd been well read, the spines creased and broken. "Those weren't there before," Sophie said quietly. She'd been to the camp a few times over the years, checking on the property, and she knew what it usually looked like. Someone brought those here recently. I walked closer and picked up the top comic. It was an issue of something called Tales from the Lake, and the cover showed a group of kids sitting around a campfire while something dark and massive rose from the water behind them. The tagline read, "Some stories are better left untold." "That's unsettling," I said, showing it to Sophie. She barely glanced at it. She was looking at the lodge building, her expression tense. "Mara, look at the windows." I followed her gaze. The windows of the lodge were dark, but I could see movement behind them, or at least I thought I could. It was subtle, just a shift in the shadows, but it was there. "Could be an animal," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Could be." Sophie unclipped her radio. "This is Ranger Clark calling base. We're at the old Camp 14 site. We've confirmed recent activity. Looks like someone's been camping here within the last few hours. We're going to do a sweep of the buildings." The radio crackled with static, then our supervisor's voice came through. "Copy that, Clark. Be careful out there. Weather's supposed to turn later this afternoon." "Will do. Clark out." We approached the lodge building slowly. The front door was slightly ajar, hanging crooked on its hinges, and I could smell something coming from inside. Dampness and rot and something else, something organic and wrong. "Remember what your sister said?" I told Sophie as we reached the porch steps. "Don't go inside." "We have to check it out," she replied. "It's our job." But she didn't sound convinced. And when we pushed open the door and stepped inside, I understood why. The interior of the lodge looked like someone had been living there for weeks, maybe months. There were sleeping bags laid out on the floor, supplies stacked against the walls, and a camping stove set up on what used to be the reception desk. But everything was wrong. The sleeping bags were arranged in a perfect circle, all of them facing inward toward a spot in the center of the room where someone had drawn something on the floor in what looked like chalk or maybe white paint. It was a symbol, a spiral that turned in on itself, surrounded by a ring of smaller spirals. And around the edge of the ring were marks that might have been letters, though they didn't form any language I recognized. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. Sophie didn't answer. She was staring at the far wall, where someone had hung a series of photographs. I walked closer, my flashlight cutting through the gloom, and felt my stomach drop. The photos showed the camp as it had been in its heyday: kids swimming, counselors leading activities, campers sitting around the fire pit. But in every single photo there was something in the background. A figure standing at the edge of the tree line, partially obscured by shadows. It was always in the same position relative to the camera, always just at the periphery of the shot, as if it had been following the photographer around. And in the last photo, a group shot of what must have been the entire camp population, maybe 60 or 70 kids and counselors, the figure wasn't in the background. It was standing right in the middle of the group, surrounded by smiling faces, but somehow separate from them. And unlike everyone else in the photo, it wasn't looking at the camera. It was looking directly at whoever would eventually look at the photograph. "We need to leave," Sophie said suddenly. "Right now." I didn't argue. Something about the lodge felt fundamentally wrong, like the air itself was contaminated. We backed out of the building, neither of us willing to turn away from that circle of sleeping bags and the symbol on the floor. Outside, the silence persisted. But now I could hear something underneath it, a faint sound, like water running somewhere nearby. But there was no stream, no creek that I knew of in this area. "Do you hear that?" I asked Sophie. She nodded. "It's coming from the fire pit." We walked back to the clearing and Sophie knelt down beside the remains of the fire. She used a stick to poke through the ashes, and that's when she found it. A flashlight. It was partially buried in the ash, the metal casing blackened but intact. Sophie pulled it out carefully, brushing off the soot, and held it up to the light. "Why would someone throw a flashlight in the fire?" I asked. "I don't think they threw it in," Sophie said. "I think they were trying to destroy it." She pressed the power button, and I expected nothing to happen. The thing had been in a fire, after all. But the flashlight clicked on, the beam strong and steady, and from inside the casing came the sound. Water. Running water, like a stream or a faucet left on. It was coming from inside the flashlight itself, which should have been impossible. Sophie dropped it immediately, and the sound stopped. The flashlight lay in the dirt between us, still glowing, but silent now. "What the fuck?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sophie picked up the flashlight again, more carefully this time, and examined it. "It's not a normal flashlight. Look at the casing." She was right. Now that I looked closer, I could see that the metal casing had markings etched into it. The same spiral symbol we'd seen inside the lodge, repeated over and over in a pattern that wrapped around the entire surface. "Someone modified this," Sophie said. "But why? And what's making that sound?" She pressed the button again, and the water sound resumed. But this time, something else happened. The beam of light, which had been pointing at the ground, began to waver and shift, as if the flashlight itself was moving even though Sophie was holding it perfectly still. And then the beam pointed toward the lake. "Don't," I said, but Sophie was already following the beam's direction, turning toward the water. The lake, which had been perfectly calm when we arrived, was now rippling. Small waves moved outward from a point maybe 30 yards offshore, as if something had just surfaced. And in the center of those ripples, I saw a glow, the same pale green color I'd seen in stories about bioluminescence, but brighter, more concentrated. "Do you see that?" Sophie asked. "Yeah, we need to go, now." But Sophie didn't move. She was transfixed by the glow, by the way it pulsed gently in rhythm with the sound of water coming from the flashlight. And I realized with growing horror that she was walking toward the shore. "Sophie, stop!" I grabbed her arm, and she jerked, as if waking from a dream. What was I doing?" she asked, her voice confused. "You were walking toward the water. The flashlight, it's doing something to you. Turn it off." She looked down at the flashlight in her hand as if seeing it for the first time, then clicked the button. The water sound stopped immediately, and the glow in the lake began to fade. "Jesus," she breathed. "Mara, I couldn't stop myself. It was like something was pulling me." "This is what your sister was warning you about," I said. "Don't let them show you the lake. Whatever's out there, it uses that flashlight. It calls people." Sophie stared at the flashlight for a long moment, then made a decision. She walked over to one of the large rocks near the fire pit and brought it down hard on the device, shattering it into pieces. The metal casing cracked, The bulb exploded, and something inside, something that looked like water but moved wrong, too thick and too slow, leaked out onto the ground. Where it touched the earth, the grass withered and died instantly. "We're leaving," Sophie said firmly. "And we're reporting this to the DNR. They need to tear this place down, all of it." We were halfway back to the boat when we heard it. Voices, coming from inside one of the cabins. They were children's voices laughing and calling to each other, and they sounded so normal, so innocent, that for a moment I wondered if we'd been wrong about the camp being abandoned. Maybe it had reopened, and we just hadn't heard about it. But Sophie grabbed my arm, her face pale. "Don't listen to them. Keep walking." "But what if there are kids? There are no kids here," she said harshly. "There haven't been kids here in 20 years. Whatever you're hearing, it's not real." The voices grew louder, more insistent. They were calling out names now, names that might have belonged to campers from decades ago. And then I heard my own name. "Mara! Mara, come play with us. We've been waiting for you." I felt that pull again, that inexplicable urge to turn toward the cabin to see who was calling me. But Sophie was dragging me forward now, practically running toward the dock. "Don't look back," she commanded. "Whatever you do, don't look back." But I did. I couldn't help it. The cabin door was open, and in the darkness inside I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, standing perfectly still and watching us leave. They were the rough size and shape of children, but there was something off about their proportions, something that made my brain refuse to process what I was seeing. And at the front of the group, standing in the doorway, was the figure from the photographs, the one that had been in every picture, always watching, always waiting. It raised one hand in what might have been a wave, or a warning. We made it to the boat, and Sophie started the motor with shaking hands. As we pulled away from the dock, I looked back at Camp 14 one last time. Every cabin door was open now, and in each doorway stood more figures, all of them watching us go. The comic books were still on the picnic table, pages fluttering in a wind I couldn't feel. And in the center of the fire pit, where Sophie had destroyed the flashlight, something glowed softly beneath the ashes. "Don't tell anyone about the flashlight," Sophie said as we headed back toward the ranger station. "About what it did. They'll think we're crazy." "What was that thing?" I asked. "What did we just see?" She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "My sister told me about it once when she was really drunk. The summer before the camp closed, some of the counselors found something in the lake. Something old, buried in the sediment at the bottom. They brought it up because they thought it was interesting. Some kind of artifact, maybe from the indigenous people who used to live in this area." "The flashlight?" I asked. "Or something like it. She said it was a tool, but not the kind of tool we understand. It was supposed to help people find things, but not things in this world. Things between worlds." "That doesn't make any sense," I said. "I know," Sophie replied. "But that's what she said. And she said that after they brought it up, weird things started happening. Kids reported seeing things in the lake, hearing voices. One counselor disappeared for 3 days, and when they found him, he couldn't remember where he'd been. He just kept saying he'd been shown the lake, whatever that means." "And that's why they closed the camp?" I asked. "Partly, but mainly because 6 kids went missing in one night, just vanished from their cabins without a trace. They searched for weeks, but never found any sign of them. That's when the camp shut down for good, and everyone who'd been there that summer was told never to talk about what happened." I felt sick. Do you think they're still there, at the camp?" "I think something is still there," Sophie said carefully. "Something that's been waiting a long time for someone to come back." We reported the activity at Camp 14 to our supervisor, but we left out most of the details. We said we'd found evidence of squatters, that the site wasn't secure, and that it should be demolished as soon as possible. We didn't mention the voices, the glowing lake, or the flashlight that dripped water that killed grass on contact. Our supervisor thanked us for the report and said she'd pass it along to the appropriate people. But I could tell from her expression that nothing would come of it. Budget constraints, environmental assessments, bureaucratic inertia. Camp 14 would sit there for years, maybe decades, slowly rotting away while whatever lived there waited for the next curious person to come calling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those figures standing in the cabin doorways, watching us leave. And I heard my name being called in those childlike voices that weren't quite right. Around 3 a.m, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Can't sleep either. Coming over?" She showed up at my apartment 20 minutes later with a bottle of whiskey and a file folder. We sat at my kitchen table and drank in silence for a while before she opened the folder. "I did some research," she said, "about Camp 14 and what happened there. My sister wasn't lying. 6 kids really did disappear in 1999, but that's not the whole story." She spread out a series of newspaper clippings and official reports. The camp had been having problems for years before that. Kids getting lost on nature hikes, only to turn up hours later with no memory of where they'd been. Counselors reporting strange lights over the lake at night. Equipment going missing, then showing up in impossible places, like finding a canoe hanging from a tree branch 30 feet off the ground. "Why didn't anyone shut it down sooner?" I asked. "Because it was profitable." Camp 14 was one of the most popular youth camps in Minnesota. Parents paid good money to send their kids there, and the owners didn't want to kill their cash cow over what they called isolated incidents. She took a long drink of a whiskey, until the night when everything fell apart. She pulled out a photocopy of a handwritten statement, testimony from one of the counselors who'd been there that final summer. I started reading, and the more I read, the colder I felt. The counselor described how on the night of August 10th, 1999, all the kids in 2 of the cabins had woken up and walked, as if in a trance, down to the lake. By the time the staff realized what was happening, 6 children were already waist-deep in the water, walking steadily toward the deep section of the lake. The counselors had managed to pull back most of them, but 6 kids kept walking. They went under the surface and never came back up. Divers searched for days but found no bodies, no evidence that the children had drowned. It was as if the lake had simply swallowed them whole. The counselor's statement ended with a sentence that made my blood run cold. The children kept saying, before they went under, that someone was showing them something beautiful, something below the lake, and they wanted to see it. "The flashlight," I said. "That's what it does. It shows people the lake. It calls them." Sophie nodded. "And I think the reason my sister called me, the reason she was so adamant that we not go inside the buildings or let them show us the lake, is because she knows they're still waiting. Whatever took those kids is still there, using that flashlight or others like it to lure people in. Then we destroyed it," I said. "The flashlight we found, we stopped it." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true, because I'd seen the glow in the fire pit as we left, seen the way it pulsed beneath the ashes. Whatever Sophie had destroyed was just one tool. There were probably others, hidden around the camp, waiting to be found. "We can't go back there," Sophie said firmly. "Ever. And we need to make sure no one else does either." "How?" I asked. "We can't exactly tell people the truth. They'll think we're insane." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "We report that the structures are unsafe. Condemned. We put up warning signs, mark the whole area as hazardous. It won't stop everyone, but it might be enough to keep most people away." It was the best plan we had. The next morning, we submitted our official report, emphasizing the structural damage to the buildings and the potential safety hazards. We recommended that the entire site be cordoned off until a full safety assessment could be completed. Our supervisor approved the recommendation, and within a week, warning signs were posted at every access point to Camp 14. The site was officially closed to the public, marked as a hazardous area awaiting demolition. But I knew those signs wouldn't be enough, because places like Camp 14 have a way of drawing people in, regardless of warnings or barriers or common sense. Some places want to be found, and they'll wait as long as it takes for the right person to come along. 3 weeks after our visit to Camp 14, I got a call at 2 in the morning. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. Middle-of-the-night calls and ranger work usually mean emergencies. Mara? The voice was female, older, and I didn't recognize it at first. Yes, who is this? It's Rachel, Sophie's sister. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. How did you get my number? Sophie gave it to me. I need to talk to you about what you found at the camp, about the flashlight. My mouth went dry. How do you know about? Because I found one too, 20 years ago, and I made the mistake of turning it on. She told me to meet her at a diner in Ely, about an hour north of where I was stationed. She said it needed to be in person, that this wasn't something she could discuss over the phone. Despite every instinct telling me this was a bad idea, I agreed. The diner was one of those old roadside places that looks like it hasn't changed since the 1950s. Vinyl booths, checkered floor, and a neon sign that flickered in the pre-dawn darkness. Rachel was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall and a clear view of the door. She looked like an older version of Sophie. Same sharp features, same wary eyes, but there was something haunted about her that went deeper than simple family resemblance. "Thanks for coming," she said as I slid into the booth across from her. "I know this seems crazy." "Everything about the last few weeks has seemed crazy," I replied. "So you might as well tell me what you know." She ordered coffee for both of us, and once the waitress had left, Rachel leaned forward and spoke in a low voice. "That summer at Camp 14, the summer before it closed, I was 22 years old. It was my 3rd summer working there, and I loved it. I loved the kids, loved being outdoors, loved everything about it. Until we found the site." "The site?" I asked. "There's a small island about half a mile offshore from Camp 14, barely more than a rocky outcrop with a few trees. One day, a group of us counselors took some kayaks out there for a picnic. We were exploring, and one of the guys found what looked like a cave entrance near the waterline. It was hidden behind some rocks, easy to miss unless you knew what you were looking for." Rachel wrapped her hands around her coffee mug as if she was cold, even though the diner was warm. "We should have left it alone, but we were young and stupid and thought we'd found something cool, so we went inside." "What was in there?" I asked. It wasn't a natural cave. The walls were too smooth, too regular, and there were carvings, symbols like the ones you saw on that flashlight. They covered every surface, spirals within spirals, patterns that seemed to shift if you looked at them too long. She took a sip of coffee, her hands shaking slightly. And in the center of the cave, on a flat stone that looked like it might have been an altar, there were objects. Tools, I guess you'd call them. Things that looked like they'd been made by human hands but served purposes we couldn't understand. We took them. God help us, we took them back to the camp because we thought they were interesting artifacts. We thought maybe they belonged in a museum. "The flashlights," I said. Rachel nodded. "There were 5 of them. They didn't look exactly like modern flashlights, but close enough that we could tell what they were supposed to be. And when we turned them on, that's when everything started going wrong." She described what had happened next. The flashlights had worked normally at first, providing light just like any other flashlight. But within a few days, the counselors who'd taken them started reporting strange experiences. They'd see things in the beams, shapes, and figures that shouldn't be there. They'd hear sounds coming from inside the casings, water and voices, and sometimes music that seemed to come from very far away. And the worst part, the flashlights would turn themselves on at night, and their beams would always point toward the lake. Always. We tried to get rid of them, Rachel said. We threw them in the water, buried them in the woods, even tried to smash them apart, but they kept coming back. We'd wake up and find them on our pillows or sitting on our desks, perfectly intact. What about the kids who disappeared? I asked. How does that connect? Rachel's expression darkened. 3 of the counselors, the ones who'd used the flashlights the most, started sleepwalking. They'd get up in the middle of the night and walk down to the lake, and when we'd wake them up, they'd say they'd been dreaming about the cave, about something inside the cave that wanted them to come back. She paused, struggling with the memory. The night those 6 kids disappeared, it wasn't random. They were from the cabin supervised by those 3 counselors. And all 3 counselors were down at the lake with them, standing waist-deep in the water with the flashlights in their hands, shining the beams down into the depths. The kids were following the light. They were walking into the lake because the light was showing them something we couldn't see. Jesus, I breathed. What happened to the counselors? They couldn't remember anything. When we pulled them out of the water, it was like they'd been hypnotized. They had no memory of leaving their cabins, no memory of taking the kids down to the lake. And the flashlights, she shuddered. The flashlights were gone, disappeared into the water with the kids. But we found one, I said. At the camp, in the fire pit. I know, Rachel said quietly. That means someone else found the cave. Someone else took another one of those things and brought it back to the camp, and the cycle is starting again. I felt a chill run down my spine. How many of them were there? In the cave? I don't know. We only took 5, but there could have been more. Dozens, maybe, all of them waiting for someone to find them and turn them on. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what she was telling me settling over us like a heavy blanket. Finally, I asked the question I'd been dreading. What are they? What's their purpose? Rachel looked at me with haunted eyes. I spent 20 years researching that question. I talked to anthropologists, historians, people who study indigenous cultures, and the best answer I got was from an Ojibwe elder who lived near the boundary waters. He told me the objects weren't tools at all, they were markers. Markers for what? I asked. Astete asked. For places where the boundary is thin. Places where this world touches something else. Something older and deeper that exists in the spaces between. The flashlights don't create light, they reveal. They show you what's already there, hiding just beneath the surface of reality. And once you've seen it, once you know it's there, it can see you too. My hands were shaking now, and I had to set down my coffee cup. So what do we do? How do we stop it? You can't stop it, Rachel said flatly. All you can do is stay away. Don't go back to that camp. Don't go near that island. And for God's sake, don't ever turn on one of those flashlights again. The more you interact with them, the stronger the connection becomes. Eventually, you won't be able to resist. You'll go into the lake just like those kids did, and you'll see what they saw. What did they see? I whispered. Rachel looked away, out the window at the dark parking lot. I don't know for sure, but the Ojibwe elder told me about a legend, about a city that exists beneath certain lakes, visible only to those who've been marked. He said it's beautiful beyond description, but it's not meant for the living, and anyone who enters it never leaves. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Promise me you won't go back there. Promise me you'll convince Sophie to stay away too. That place took 6 children from me, kids I was supposed to protect. I won't let it take my sister. I promised, and I meant it. But even as I drove back to my apartment that morning, watching the sun rise over the forest, I knew it wouldn't be that simple, because Camp 14 wasn't done with us yet. The sign started 2 days later. Small things at first. I'd find water on the floor of my apartment even though I hadn't spilled anything. I'd hear that sound in my dreams, the running water that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And worst of all, I started seeing things in reflective surfaces. It would happen when I least expected it. I'd glance at a window or a mirror or the surface of a lake, and for just a second, I'd see a figure standing behind me. The same figure from the photographs at Camp 14. Always watching, always waiting. Sophie was experiencing it too. She called me one night, her voice tight with fear, and said she'd found something in her truck. At first, she thought it was just condensation on the inside of her windshield, but when she wiped it away, she saw that the moisture had formed words. Come back. It's not stopping, she said. Whatever we did, whatever we saw, it's marked us. It knows who we are now. Rachel said we need to stay away, I told her. That the more we interact with it, the stronger it gets. But what if it comes to us instead? Sophie asked. What if staying away isn't enough? I didn't have an answer for that. And 3 days later, I found out that Sophie's fear was justified. I was doing a routine patrol of one of the entry points when I got a radio call from headquarters. A group of hikers had reported finding a body near Camp 14. A woman, deceased, partially in the water. They were requesting ranger assistance to secure the scene until law enforcement could arrive. My blood ran cold. Did they ID the body? I asked. Negative, but they said she appeared to have been in the water for a while, maybe a few days. Sophie and I responded together, taking one of the patrol boats out to Camp 14. We'd sworn we wouldn't go back there, but this was different. This was an emergency response, not a choice. We had to go. The hikers who'd found the body were waiting at the dock when we arrived. They were visibly shaken, and one of them was crying. They led us to a spot about 50 yards from the main camp area, where the shoreline curved into a small inlet. The body was there, floating face down in about 3 feet of water. Female, mid-30s based on what I could see, wearing what looked like hiking gear. Sophie and I waded in carefully, following protocol for recovering a body from water. And when we turned her over, I saw something that made me gasp. Clutched in her right hand, still somehow held tight even in death, was a flashlight, one of the marked ones, covered in those spiral symbols. And her eyes, God, her eyes were still open, and they were staring at nothing with an expression of absolute rapture, as if she'd seen something so beautiful in her final moments that death itself hadn't been able to erase the joy from her face. Sophie checked for a pulse even though we both knew it was pointless. She's gone. Probably been dead for at least 48 hours based on the condition of the body. Look at her hand, I said. She won't let go of the flashlight. Sophie tried to pry the woman's fingers open, but they were locked tight. It's like rigor mortis, but worse. Her whole hand is frozen around it. We documented the scene and waited for the sheriff's department to arrive. While we waited, I noticed something else. The woman's other hand was clenched in a fist, and there was something inside it. A piece of paper, maybe, or cloth. When the sheriff's deputies arrived and took over the scene, they managed to open both of the woman's hands. The flashlight in her right hand had to be broken off. Her grip was so tight that they couldn't remove it without snapping her fingers, which they finally did. And in her left hand was a note, written in shaky handwriting on water-stained paper. I saw the city. It's real. I'm going home." The sheriff identified the woman as Patricia Hammond, age 34, from Duluth. She'd been reported missing by her family 3 days earlier, after she'd failed to return from a solo camping trip in the Boundary Waters. According to her family, she'd been obsessed with local legends and folklore, and she'd spent the last several months researching the history of Camp 14. The official cause of death was ruled as accidental drowning, but I knew better. Patricia Hammond had found one of the flashlights, probably hidden somewhere around the camp, waiting for someone curious enough to look, and she'd turned it on. She'd seen what it wanted her to see. And she'd walked into the lake willingly, following the light down into the depths to find the city that waited below. After the body was recovered and the investigation wrapped up, Sophie and I sat in her truck in the ranger station parking lot, neither of us knowing what to say. "We can't keep this quiet anymore," Sophie finally said. "Someone else died because of what's at that camp. We need to tell someone, the DNR, the sheriff, someone who can actually do something about it." "And tell them what?" I asked. "That there are magical flashlights that show you underwater cities? That a woman drowned because she was hypnotized by ancient artifacts we don't understand? They'll think we're insane." "Then what do we do?" Sophie demanded. "Just wait for the next person to die? The next group of kids to disappear?" I didn't have an answer. But that night I made a decision. If the authorities wouldn't do anything about Camp 14, then I would. I'd go back there one more time, find every one of those flashlights and destroy them. All of them, whatever it took. I didn't tell Sophie my plan. I knew she'd try to stop me, or worse, insist on coming with me. And I couldn't risk both of us getting pulled in by whatever waited at the camp. So I went alone. I took a kayak this time instead of a motorboat. Quieter, less conspicuous. I launched just before dawn, when the lake was still shrouded in mist and the world felt suspended between night and day. The paddle to Camp 14 took about an hour, and with every stroke, I felt that familiar dread building in my chest. The camp looked different in the early morning light. Less ominous, maybe, but also somehow more sad. The buildings sagged with decay. The dock was tilting dangerously, and everything was covered in a layer of dew that made it look like the whole place was slowly dissolving back into the forest. I beached my kayak and stood on the shore, steeling myself for what I was about to do. The plan was simple. Search every building, find any flashlights or other artifacts, and destroy them completely. Then I'd leave and never come back. I started with the lodge building, the same place where Sophie and I had found the symbol on the floor. The sleeping bags were gone now, probably confiscated by the sheriff during their investigation of Patricia Hammond's death, but the symbol remained. Someone had tried to scrub it away, but you could still see the faint outline of the spiral on the floorboards. I searched every room, every closet, every cabinet. I found camping equipment, old furniture, and piles of moldy paperwork, but no flashlights. Not a single one. The cabins were the same. I went through them one by one, methodically searching every possible hiding place, and came up empty. It was as if someone had already been through and collected all the artifacts, or as if they'd never been there at all. By the time I reached the last cabin, number 7, the one where I'd heard the children's voices calling my name, the sun was fully up and the mist had burned off the lake. I almost didn't go inside. Every instinct was screaming at me to get back in my kayak and leave, to accept that I'd done what I could, and it was time to go. But I went in anyway. The interior of cabin 7 looked like all the others. Empty bunk beds, dusty windows, and the smell of rot and abandonment. But there was something different about this one. The air felt thicker somehow, more oppressive, and I could hear that sound again. Faint, but unmistakable. running water, I followed the sound to the back of the cabin, where a small storage closet was built into the wall. The door was stuck, swollen with moisture, but I managed to force it open. Inside the closet, arranged carefully on the shelves like they were on display, were flashlights. Dozens of them. Maybe 40 or 50, all identical, all covered in those spiral symbols, and they were glowing softly, pulsing in a rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat. I stood there frozen, unable to look away. The water sound was coming from all of them at once, a chorus of streams and rivers and rain that seemed to fill the cabin. And in my mind, I started to see images. The underwater city Rachel had mentioned, built of stone and coral and things that had no name, streets that curved impossibly, buildings that defied geometry, and in the center of it all, a great spiral that went down and down and down into darkness. And I understood, finally, what the flashlights were for. They weren't tools or weapons or markers. They were invitations. Keys, maybe, to a place that existed alongside our world but separate from it. A city built by something that had been old when humanity was young. Something that waited in the deep places of the world for anyone curious enough or foolish enough to look. One of the flashlights on the shelf clicked on by itself, and its beam pointed directly at me. And in that beam, I saw myself as I would be, standing in the water, walking deeper and deeper until the lake closed over my head, following the light down to the city that waited below. I saw myself happy, peaceful, finally understanding the truth that had eluded me my entire life. And I wanted it. God help me. I wanted it so badly. I don't know how long I stood there, mesmerized by the light. It could have been seconds or hours. But something, some small, stubborn part of my brain that refused to surrender, made me look away, made me reach out and grab the shelf, pulling it down and sending all those flashlights crashing to the floor. They shattered, and that wrong moving water spilled out, hissing and steaming where it touched the wood. The glow flickered and died, and the sound of running water cut off abruptly. And I ran. I ran out of the cabin, across the clearing, down to the shore where my kayak waited. I shoved off and paddled as hard as I could, putting distance between myself and Camp 14, and I didn't look back until I was halfway across the lake. When I finally did look back, I saw smoke rising from Cabin 7. The water from the flashlights had somehow ignited the old dry wood, and fire was spreading quickly through the structure. Within minutes, the entire cabin was engulfed, and the flames were already spreading to the neighboring buildings. I should have called it in. I should have radioed for help, reported the fire before it could spread to the forest. But I didn't. I just kept paddling, watching as Camp 14 burned behind me, hoping that the fire would consume everything. The flashlights, the symbols, whatever dark presence had made that place its home. By the time I made it back to the ranger station, the fire was visible from miles away. Sophie was already coordinating the response, sending crews out to contain the blaze before it could spread to the surrounding forest. She looked at me with questions in her eyes, but I just shook my head. "Later," I said. "I'll explain later." It took 3 days to fully contain the fire. Camp 14 was completely destroyed. Nothing left but charred foundations and ash. The DNR launched an investigation into how the fire started, but they never found a definitive cause. Lightning strike, they eventually decided, even though there hadn't been a storm in days. Sophie and I never talked about what really happened. We didn't need to. We both knew the truth. I'd destroyed the flashlights, and in doing so, I'd destroyed the camp itself. Whatever had been waiting there, whatever had called to Patricia Hammond and those 6 children 20 years ago, was gone. Or at least, I hoped it was. That was almost 4 years ago. I'm not a ranger anymore. I left the DNR about 6 months after the fire at Camp 14 and moved to the Twin Cities. I work in an office now, doing environmental compliance for a construction company. It's boring, predictable, and completely safe, exactly what I need. But I still think about that summer, about the flashlights and the underwater city and the figures in the cabin doorways, and I wonder if I really destroyed everything, or if I just scattered it. If those flashlights were truly gone, or if they'd somehow survived, waiting in the ashes for someone else to find them. Last month, I got my answer. Sophie called me on a Tuesday evening. I almost didn't pick up. We'd drifted apart after I left the DNR, and our occasional conversations were always awkward, weighed down by memories neither of us wanted to discuss. But something made me answer. "Mara," she said, and I could hear the tension in her voice immediately. "I need to tell you something. About the camp." My stomach dropped. "What about it?" "They're rebuilding it." I sat down heavily on my couch. "What? Why would they do that?" "Private investors bought the land from the state. They're planning to turn it into some kind of wilderness retreat center, ecotourism, corporate team building events, that sort of thing. Construction started 2 weeks ago." "You have to stop them," I said. "You have to tell them what's there, what happened." "I tried," Sophie interrupted. "I told them the site was unstable, that there were hazardous materials, that the fire hadn't been fully investigated. They didn't care. They have all the permits they need, and there's nothing I can do to stop it." "Then we go public," I said. "We tell everyone what we saw, what those flashlights did, and ruin our reputations in the process. Mara, no one will believe us. We'll sound like conspiracy theorists or people who've been in the wilderness too long. The best we can do is keep monitoring the situation and hope nothing happens." But I knew something would happen. Places like Camp 14 don't just let go. They wait, patient and hungry, for the next opportunity to pull someone in. I couldn't let it happen again. So 2 days later, I drove back up to the Boundary Waters for the first time in 4 years. The construction site at Camp 14 was a hive of activity. Workers were clearing the burned foundations, surveyors were marking out new building sites, and heavy equipment was tearing up the ground where the old cabins had stood. I parked at a distance and watched through binoculars, looking for any sign that they'd found something they shouldn't have. That's when I saw him, a young man, maybe mid-20s, standing at the edge of the clearing with something in his hands. Even from a distance, I could see the spiral symbols etched into the metal casing. He'd found one of the flashlights. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on him. He was turning the device over in his hands, examining it with curiosity, and I could see the exact moment when he figured out what it was. He pressed the button. The beam cut through the afternoon light, and even from where I was parked, I could see it pointing toward the lake. The man's expression changed, from curiosity to confusion to something like wonder, and he started walking. I was out of my car and running before I'd even consciously decided to move. I crashed through the underbrush, ignoring the branches that tore at my clothes, and shouted at him to stop. But he didn't seem to hear me. He just kept walking, his eyes fixed on something only he could see, the flashlight held out in front of him like a divining rod. He was at the water's edge by the time I reached him. I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back, but it was like trying to move a statue. He didn't even acknowledge my presence. He just kept walking, wading into the lake with that expression of absolute rapture on his face. "Stop!" I screamed. "Don't look at it! Don't follow the light!" But he was already waist deep, then chest deep, and the water was closing over his head. I went in after him without thinking, the cold shock of the lake stealing my breath. I grabbed his shirt, his arm, anything I could reach, but he slipped through my fingers as easily as water. And then he was gone, just disappeared beneath the surface, the flashlight still glowing in his hand as he sank. I dove under, searching frantically, but the water was too murky and too deep. I couldn't see anything except that faint glow, getting dimmer and dimmer as it descended into the darkness. I surfaced, gasping, and looked around wildly. The construction workers had noticed the commotion and were running toward the shore. Someone was calling 911, someone else was diving in to help search. But I knew it was too late. I'd seen this before. The man was gone, pulled down to the city that waited in the depths, and we'd never find his body. Just like Patricia Hammond. Just like those 6 children from '99. The search went on for 3 days. Divers combed the lake bottom, helicopters searched from above, and volunteers lined the shores looking for any sign of the missing worker. His name was David Brennan, age 27, an environmental engineer from Madison who'd been hired to do water quality assessments for the construction project. They never found him. And worse, when they searched his belongings, they found notes. Pages and pages of research about Camp 14, about the legends and the disappearances and the rumors of something beneath the lake. David Brennan hadn't just stumbled upon the flashlight by accident. He'd been looking for it. He'd known what it was, or thought he did. And he'd activated it anyway, believing he could control it or understand it, or maybe just too curious to resist. Just like Patricia Hammond. Just like the counselors from '99. The pattern was repeating itself. After David's disappearance, the construction company suspended work on the site pending the outcome of the investigation. But I knew they'd be back eventually. The investors had too much money tied up in the project to just walk away, and once the search was officially called off, they'd resume building their wilderness retreat center, and more people would come. More curious tourists and workers and visitors who'd hear the stories and want to investigate. And some of them would find the flashlights, because I knew now that I hadn't destroyed them all. There were more, hidden in places I'd never thought to look, waiting for the right person to come along. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the ranger station, watching the activity at the construction site through my binoculars, and I made a decision. I couldn't stop what was happening at Camp 14. I couldn't protect everyone who might be drawn to that place or prevent them from finding what they were looking for. But I could bear witness. I could document what was happening and make sure that when the next person disappeared, there would be a record. Evidence. Something that future rangers or investigators could use to understand the pattern. So I started writing everything down. This story, what I saw, what I experienced, what I know about the flashlights and the underwater city and the thing that waits in the deep places. Not because I think it will stop anyone. People like David Brennan, people like Patricia Hammond, they're going to seek out these places regardless of the warnings. Curiosity is stronger than caution. The desire to see the truth is stronger than the fear of what that truth might be. But maybe, just maybe, my story will reach someone who's standing on the shore, flashlight in hand, trying to decide whether to turn it on. Maybe they'll read this and think twice. Maybe they'll choose safety over knowledge, life over the beautiful lie that waits beneath the water. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll read this story and think, but what if it's real? What if there really is something down there worth seeing? And they'll press that button and follow the light, and they'll become part of the pattern. Another name added to the long list of people who've disappeared into the depths of Minnesota's lakes. I don't know which it will be. All I know is that I have to try. Sophie called me yesterday. She said the construction company had resumed work at Camp 14, and they'd brought in a new environmental engineer to replace David Brennan. She said the new guy seemed competent and professional, and completely unaware of what he was walking into. We should warn him, Sophie said. Tell him about the flashlights, about what happened to David. He won't believe us, I replied. No one ever does. Then what do we do? I didn't have an answer, but that night, I drove back up to the Boundary Waters one more time. I parked at my usual spot and walked down to the shore of Little Saginaga Lake, and I stood there in the darkness, looking out at the water. And I saw them, lights glowing beneath the surface, pulsing in that familiar rhythm. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, spread out across the lake bed like a city made of stars. They were beautiful, mesmerizing. And for just a moment, I understood why people like David and Patricia couldn't resist. Why they'd chosen to follow the lights into the depths. Because whatever was down there, whatever had built that underwater city, it was offering something that none of us could find in our ordinary lives. A glimpse of something beyond. A truth that transcended our limited human understanding. And the price, the loss of your life, your identity, your place in this world, seemed like a small thing to pay for that kind of revelation. I stood there for a long time, watching the lights pulse and sway, and I thought about walking into the water, about letting the cold embrace me, about sinking down to join David and Patricia and all the others who'd answered the call, about finally seeing what they'd seen, understanding what they'd understood. But I didn't. Because I'm not brave enough, or maybe I'm too brave, because choosing to live, choosing to stay in this ordinary world with all its mundane struggles and disappointments, that takes a different kind of courage than following the light into the unknown. So I turned away from the lake and walked back to my car, and I drove home to the Twin Cities and my boring office job and my safe, predictable life. And I'm writing this story not as a warning exactly, because I know warnings don't work. I'm writing it as a record, as proof that these places exist, that the boundaries between worlds are thinner than we think, and that there are still mysteries in this world that we don't understand. Camp 14 is being rebuilt. The construction will finish next spring, and by summer, there will be tourists and corporate groups and families visiting the site, completely unaware of what lies beneath the water just offshore. Some of them will hear the stories. The legends always persist, no matter how hard people try to suppress them. And some of those people will go looking. They'll search the reconstructed buildings and the surrounding forest. They'll dive in the lake or explore the caves or poke around in places they're not supposed to go. And eventually, someone will find another flashlight. Because they're still there. I know they are, waiting in the dark, patient as stones, ready to show the next curious person the truth that lies beneath. When that happens, and it will happen, I hope they think of this story. I hope they remember David Brennan and Patricia Hammond and those 6 children from 1999. I hope they understand that the light they're holding isn't showing them something new. It's revealing something that's always been there, hiding just beneath the surface of reality. And I hope they make the right choice. But if they don't, if they decide to follow the light anyway, to see what lies at the bottom of the lake, then I hope they find whatever they're looking for. I hope the underwater city is as beautiful as it appears in the flashlight's beam. I hope the truth they discover is worth the price they'll pay. Because once you turn on that flashlight, once you see what it shows you, there's no going back. You'll spend the rest of your life, however long or short it may be, haunted by that glimpse of something beyond. And eventually, like David and Patricia and all the others, you'll return to the water. You'll wade in until the lake closes over your head. And you'll follow the light down into the depths, leaving behind nothing but questions and a story that no one will quite believe. That's what happened at Camp 14. That's what's happening there now. And that's what will continue to happen there for as long as the camp exists, for as long as there are people curious enough and brave enough and foolish enough to seek out the truth. I just hope you're not one of them. But if you are, if you're reading this and thinking about visiting Camp 14, about searching for one of those marked flashlights, about seeing the underwater city for yourself, then I have one final piece of advice for you. Don't turn it on. Whatever you do, no matter how curious you are, no matter how badly you want to know what's down there in the deep places, don't turn on the flashlight. Because once you see what it shows you, you'll never be able to unsee it. And sooner or later, you'll find yourself standing at the water's edge, making the same choice that David and Patricia made. And I think we both know which way that choice ends. My name is Mara Jensen. I used to be a ranger in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. And this is the story of Camp 14, a place where the boundary between worlds is thin, where curious people disappear into the depths, and where something old and patient waits in the darkness below. I survived my encounter with that place, but I'm not sure survival is the same thing as escape, because even now, 4 years later and hundreds of miles away, I still dream about the underwater city. I still hear that sound of running water in quiet moments. And sometimes, when I look at reflective surfaces, I see that figure standing behind me. Watching. Waiting. Maybe I'm marked too. Maybe everyone who visits Camp 14 carries a piece of it away with them, a connection that can never be fully severed. Maybe one day I'll find myself driving north without quite knowing why, pulled back to the lake by something I don't understand and can't resist. But not today. Today I'm still here, still fighting the pull, still choosing this world over whatever waits in the one below. I just hope I can keep choosing it tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, because the lights are always there, always calling, and the water is patient. My name is Noah Dempsey, and I need to tell you about something that happened on Vermilion Lake in northeastern Minnesota. I've been a fisheries ranger with the Minnesota DNR for 8 years now, and in that time I've seen a lot of strange things. Wildlife behaving oddly, unexplained equipment failures, the occasional report of something in the water that shouldn't be there. But nothing prepared me for what I heard that night in September. I'm telling you this story because I think you deserve to know. Because if you ever find yourself on one of Minnesota's northern lakes after dark, and you hear something calling your name from the water, you need to understand what you're dealing with. And more importantly, you need to know not to answer. This happened on September 23rd, just after sunset. I was doing a routine patrol of the western section of Vermilion Lake, checking for illegal fishing activity and making sure all the recreational boaters had cleared out before dark. Vermilion is one of the larger lakes in the area, about 40 miles of shoreline, dozens of islands, and depths that go down over 70 feet in some places. It's popular with fishermen because of the walleye and northern pike, and it's remote enough that people can get into trouble out there if they're not careful. The sun had just dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, when my radio started acting up. Static at first, then that high-pitched whine that usually means the battery's dying. I checked it, fully charged. But the static continued, getting louder, until I had to turn the volume down to almost nothing. I was about 2 miles from the nearest shore, right in the middle of the lake, when I decided to cut my engine and check the radio more thoroughly. The moment the motor died, the silence hit me. If you've ever been out on a big lake at dusk, you know what I mean. It's not really silent. There are always sounds, water lapping against the hull, wind in the trees on distant shores, the occasional call of a loon. But this was different. This was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, that makes you hyper-aware of every tiny sound your own body makes. I was fiddling with the radio, trying to figure out what was causing the interference, when I heard it for the first time. A voice, clear as day, echoing across the water from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, bouncing off the surface of the lake in a way that shouldn't have been possible. And it was calling my name. Noah. I froze, my hand still on the radio. The voice was male, I think, though there was something off about it. Something that made it hard to determine age or even if it was fully human. It had a quality to it that reminded me of underwater recordings I'd heard. Distorted, echoing, but somehow perfectly clear. Noah Dempsey. My heart was hammering now. I scanned the lake in all directions, looking for another boat, for someone playing a prank on me with a loudspeaker. But the lake was empty. Just me and my patrol boat, sitting in the middle of all that dark water as the last light faded from the sky. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and foolish in all that emptiness. "DNR Ranger, identify yourself." Nothing, just the silence and the gentle lap of water against my boat. I waited for maybe 30 seconds, starting to convince myself I'd imagined it. The isolation, the failing light, the weird radio interference. It all added up to my mind playing tricks on me. That's what I told myself. Then it came again, louder this time. "Noah, come closer." The voice seemed to be coming from directly ahead of me, from the deepest part of the lake. I grabbed my spotlight and shone it across the water, but there was nothing there. Just the flat, dark surface of the lake completely undisturbed. No ripples, no movement, nothing to indicate where the voice might be coming from. "Who are you?" I shouted. "Where are you?" "Below," the voice answered, and this time I felt it as much as heard it. A vibration that seemed to come up through the hull of my boat, resonating in my chest. Below, with the others. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The water around my boat, maybe 50 feet in every direction, was perfectly flat, glass smooth, like someone had poured oil on the surface. But beyond that circle, I could see the normal ripples and small waves you'd expect on a lake. It was as if my boat was sitting in the exact center of a zone of absolute calm. I reached for my radio, ready to call this in, but it was completely dead now. No static, no whine, nothing. The screen was dark, and when I tried to restart it, nothing happened. My phone was the same, fully charged, but when I tried to unlock it, the screen stayed black. "Noah, why do you run the surface? Come below, see what we've found." The voice was all around me now, coming from the water itself. And I realized with creeping horror that it wasn't echoing off the surface. It was coming from beneath it, from deep, deep down in the dark. I started my engine, or tried to. The motor turned over but wouldn't catch. I tried again, pumping the throttle, but got nothing. Dead. My boat was dead in the water, sitting in that impossible circle of calm, and something down in the depths was calling my name. "See the city, Noah. See where the sound goes when it dies. We're waiting." I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with a fear I'd never experienced before. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The voice cut off mid-sentence. The unnatural calm around my boat dispersed, and small waves began lapping at my hull again. My radio crackled to life, and I heard my supervisor's voice. "Dempsey, you copy? We lost your signal for a few minutes there." My hands were shaking as I grabbed the radio. "Copy. I had some equipment trouble. Everything's working now." "You need assistance?" I looked out at the lake, now just a normal expanse of dark water in the gathering twilight. "Negative. I'm heading back to the station." I tried my engine again, and this time it started immediately, purring like it had never had a problem. My phone was working too, showing full battery and perfect signal. It was as if nothing had happened at all, but I knew what I'd heard, and I knew it wasn't my imagination. I radioed ahead to let them know I was coming in early, citing equipment issues that needed to be checked. When I got back to the ranger station, my colleague, Tessa Walsh, was there, working late on some research project. Tessa was our wildlife acoustics specialist. She'd come to the DNR a few years ago with a degree in bioacoustics and had been working on a study of how loon calls propagate across Minnesota's lakes. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Noah, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Not seen," I said. "Heard." I told her everything, the voice, the way it seemed to come from below the lake, the dead zone of calm water, the equipment failures. I expected her to be skeptical, to suggest I'd been out in the sun too long, or that I'd heard a fisherman playing a prank, but instead her expression grew serious. "Show me exactly where you were," she said, pulling up a map of Vermilion Lake on her computer. I pointed to the spot, right over one of the deepest sections. There, about 2 miles from any shore. Depth is probably around 70 feet there. Tessa was quiet for a moment, staring at the map. Then she said, "That's the 3rd report this month." I stared at her. "What?" "We've had 2 other reports of strange sounds from that general area, both from fishermen, both around dusk. They described hearing what sounded like voices or music coming from the water. One guy said it sounded like a church choir singing underwater." "Why wasn't I told about this?" I asked. "Because officially, we dismissed them as hoaxes or misidentification. Sound does weird things on water, especially at dusk when the air temperature changes. It can carry for miles, bounce off surfaces in unexpected ways. We figured they were hearing someone on shore, and the sound was just traveling strangely." "But," I prompted, because I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "But I've been recording lake sounds as part of my research. I've got hydrophones, underwater microphones, deployed at various depths all around Vermilion, and I've picked up some things I can't explain." She hesitated. "Things that sound like voices, but they're coming from depths where there shouldn't be any sound at all, except for fish and the occasional boat motor." She pulled up some audio files on her computer and handed me a pair of headphones. "Listen to this. I recorded it 3 nights ago at about the same time you had your experience." I put on the headphones, and she played the file. At first, it was just the ambient sound of underwater, the subtle creaks and groans of water pressure, the distant thrum of boat motors on the surface. But then, underneath it all, I heard something else. Voices. Multiple voices, all speaking at once, but not quite in unison. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the rhythm, the cadence. It sounded almost like a conversation, or a chant. "Jesus," I breathed. "What is that?" "I don't know," Tessa admitted. "The hydrophone that picked this up was at 60 feet, positioned just above the lake bed. There's nothing down there that should be making that sound. No fish vocalizes like that, and it's too deep for any human activity." "Could it be equipment malfunction?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "That's what I thought at first, but I've checked everything. The hydrophone is working perfectly, and I've picked up similar sounds from 3 different units in different parts of the lake. And here's the really strange part." She pulled up another screen, showing a spectrogram of the audio. "Look at the frequency pattern. It's not random. There's structure to it, like language, and it seems to be responding to sounds from the surface." "Responding how?" I asked. "Watch this." She played another file, and I could hear the sound of a boat motor passing overhead. And then, a few seconds later, the voices underneath grew louder, more agitated. They seemed to be reacting. "It's like they're aware of activity on the surface," Tessa said. "Like they're listening to us as much as we're listening to them." I took off the headphones, my mind racing. "We need to report this. To the DNR headquarters, maybe even the university. This could be—" "What?" Tessa interrupted. "What would we tell them? That we're picking up voices from the bottom of a lake? They'll think we're crazy. Or worse, they'll think we're fabricating data, I could lose my job, Noah. She had a point. Without more evidence, without understanding what we were actually dealing with, going public with this would only hurt our credibility. So, what do? I asked. Tessa thought for a moment. We investigate. Properly. Scientifically. I'll analyze the audio more thoroughly, see if I can determine what's actually creating these sounds. And you, she looked at me seriously, you need to go back out there. My stomach dropped. Go back? During daylight. With a working radio and backup communication. We need to see if this is consistent, if it happens again. And if it does, I need you to record it. Get as much audio as you can. Every instinct was telling me this was a bad idea, but I was also curious, because as terrifying as the experience had been, part of me needed to understand what I'd heard out there, what had called my name from the depths of Vermilion Lake. All right, I said finally, but we do this together. I'm not going out there alone again. Tessa nodded. Agreed, we'll go tomorrow morning. I'll bring my equipment and we'll set up some temporary hydrophones in that exact location. If there's something down there, we're going to find out what it is. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice echoing across the dark water. Noah, come closer. See what we've found. And I kept thinking about what it had said about others. Were there other people down there? Other people who'd heard the voice and answered its call? I pulled up missing persons reports for the Vermilion Lake area, going back 5 years. There were more than I expected. 7 people who'd disappeared in or around the lake, presumed drowned. Most were boaters or fishermen who'd gone out alone and never come back. Their boats had been found drifting, sometimes with the engines still running, but no sign of the occupants. The bodies were never recovered. 7 people in 5 years. That seemed like a lot for one lake, even a popular one. And looking at the map, I noticed something chilling. All 7 disappearances had occurred in the western section of the lake, the same area where I'd heard the voice. I sent the information to Tessa, and she responded almost immediately. Can't sleep either. Notice the same pattern. We need to be careful tomorrow. Morning came slowly. I met Tessa at the ranger station just after dawn, and we loaded her equipment into my patrol boat. Hydrophones, recording devices, a depth sounder, and backup communication equipment. We also brought life jackets, flares, and a satellite phone, just in case. The lake was beautiful in the early morning light. The surface like hammered silver and the air clean and cool. It was hard to believe that something sinister could exist in such a peaceful place. But I couldn't shake the memory of that voice, or the feeling of being watched by something from below. We motored out to the location where I'd had my experience, Tessa checking coordinates on her GPS. When we reached the spot, I cut the engine, and we sat there in the silence, listening. Nothing. Just the normal sounds of a lake in the morning. Birds calling from the distant shore, the gentle lap of water against the hull. Let's get the hydrophones in the water, Tessa said. We'll set up 3 of them at different depths, 30 feet, 50 feet, and as close to the bottom as we can get. We worked quickly and efficiently, deploying the hydrophones on weighted lines and positioning them in a triangle pattern around our boat. Each one was connected wirelessly to Tessa's recording equipment, and she could monitor all 3 simultaneously. Okay, she said once everything was set up. Now we wait. We waited for almost 2 hours. Tessa monitored the audio feeds, occasionally adjusting settings or making notes. I kept watch on the surface, scanning for any signs of the unusual calm I'd experienced the night before. But everything seemed normal. This might have been a waste of time, I said finally. Maybe it only happens at dusk. Maybe, Tessa agreed. But let's give it until noon. I want to get a full range of... she stopped mid-sentence, her eyes fixed on the recording equipment. "Wait, I'm getting something." She handed me a set of headphones, and I put them on. At first, I heard nothing unusual, just the ambient underwater sounds I'd heard in her recordings yesterday. But then, faint but unmistakable, I heard it. Voices. They were distant, muffled, but they were definitely there, and they were getting louder. "It's coming from the deepest hydrophone," Tessa said, her voice tight with excitement and fear. 68 feet down." The voices grew clearer, multiple speakers all talking at once, creating a strange cacophony that almost sounded like music. And underneath it all, I heard my name again. Noah. I pulled off the headphones and looked at the water around us. Still completely normal. Small waves, occasional ripples from the breeze. Nothing to indicate that anything unusual was happening below the surface. "Are you recording this?" I asked Tessa. "Everything," she confirmed. "This is incredible. The sound quality is—" She stopped, her face going pale. "Noah, the depth reading on that hydrophone, it's changing." I looked at her screen. The hydrophone had been deployed at 68 feet, just a few feet above the lake bed. But according to the display, it was now at 80 feet. Then 90, then 100. "That's impossible," I said. "The lake isn't that deep here. We checked the charts." "I know," Tessa said, and I could hear the fear in her voice now. "But the reading is still changing. It's at 120 now, 130. The voices in the headphones grew louder, more insistent, and then I heard something that made my blood freeze. It wasn't just my name anymore. It was a question. Noah? Why does she listen? Why does Tessa bring the ears to our waters? I grabbed the headphones off my head and looked at Tessa. It knows your name. It's talking about you. Her face had gone sheet white. What? The voice. It just asked why you're listening, why you brought the hydrophones. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then Tessa reached for the controls, ready to pull up the hydrophones. But before she could activate the retrieval system, something happened. The water around our boat began to change. Not dramatically, no whirlpool or sudden disturbance. But gradually the surface became smoother, flatter, until we were sitting in the center of that same impossible circle of calm I'd experienced the night before. "Start the engine," Tessa said quietly. "Start it now." I turned the key. Nothing. The motor turned over but wouldn't catch. "Noah," I tried again. Still nothing. The voices from the hydrophones were almost deafening now, even without the headphones. We could hear them directly, echoing up from the depths, distorted but clear. And they were all saying the same thing now, in unison. "Come down, come see, the others are waiting. The city needs new voices." The depth reading on Tessa's screen had stopped at 240 feet. Impossible for this lake, impossible for any lake in Minnesota. But the hydrophone was still transmitting, still sending back audio. And what we heard in those final moments before the transmission cut out completely would haunt me forever. It wasn't just voices anymore, it was screaming. Dozens, maybe hundreds of voices all screaming at once, but not in fear or pain, in joy, in ecstasy, like they'd discovered something so wonderful that they couldn't contain their excitement. And then silence. The transmission cut out. The depth reading went to 0, and the unnatural calm around our boat dissipated as quickly as it had appeared. My engine started on the first try. We didn't speak during the ride back to the ranger station. Tessa clutched her recording equipment like a life preserver, her knuckles white, while I pushed the boat as fast as I dared. It wasn't until we were safely at the dock, on solid ground, that either of us found our voices. "We lost $3,000 worth of equipment down there," Tessa said quietly. "All 3 hydrophones are gone." "Forget the equipment," I replied. "Did you hear what that thing said? It knew your name. It knew what we were doing." She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine terror. "It's not possible. Sound doesn't work that way. There's no mechanism for something at the bottom of a lake to—" She trailed off, because we both knew that what we'd experienced wasn't governed by normal acoustic principles. Whatever was down there, it operated outside the rules we understood. "We need to tell someone," I said. "The DNR, the sheriff, somebody. Those missing persons reports. I think I know what happened to them now." "And say what?" Tessa asked. "That there's something at the bottom of Vermilion Lake calling people's names? That it's using our hydrophones to listen to us? That it's pulling our equipment down into depths that shouldn't exist?" She shook her head. "They'll think we're insane. Or they'll think we're covering up an equipment failure. Then what do we do?" I demanded. "Just pretend it didn't happen. Wait for someone else to disappear?" Before Tessa could answer, my supervisor, Bill Morrison, came out of the station. He'd been with the DNR for 30 years and had seen just about everything the lakes could throw at him. Or so he thought. "Dempsey, Walsh," he called out. "Got a minute?" We followed him inside, and he pulled up something on his computer. A weather map showing Vermilion Lake and the surrounding area. "We've had a report from the National Weather Service. They're picking up some unusual readings from the lake. Atmospheric disturbances, they're calling it. Strange pressure variations centered over the western section." Tessa and I exchanged glances. "When did this start?" she asked. "About 3 weeks ago, but it's gotten more pronounced in the last few days. NWS is wondering if it's related to the upcoming cold front or if there's something else going on." He looked at us. "You two have been doing work out there. Noticed anything unusual?" I opened my mouth to tell him everything, but Tessa jumped in first. "Nothing significant, some minor equipment glitches, but that's pretty standard for end of season." Bill nodded, accepting her answer. "All right, well, keep an eye on it. If the weather does turn, we might need to post warnings for boaters." After he left, I turned to Tessa. "Why didn't you tell him?" "Because I need to figure out what we're dealing with first," she said. "I need to analyze the recordings, research similar phenomena, understand this before we go to anyone with it. Otherwise, we're just two rangers with a scary story." "We're two rangers who almost died out there," I corrected. "But we didn't," she said firmly. "We got away. And now we have data. Real, recorded evidence. Let me work with it, see what I can learn. Then we'll decide what to do." I didn't like it, but I understood her reasoning. So I agreed to keep quiet for a few days while she analyzed our recordings and researched similar phenomena. In the meantime, I was supposed to stay off the lake, file routine reports, and act like everything was normal. But that night, I had visitors. I lived in a small cabin about half a mile from the lake, a place I'd rented when I first took the ranger job. It was isolated, exactly what I wanted when I moved up here from the cities. But that isolation felt different now. Threatening. Around midnight, I was awakened by a sound. At first, I thought it was rain, a steady pattering against my windows. But when I looked outside, the sky was clear, full of stars. The pattering continued, and I realized it was coming from the lakeside of the cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside, every instinct screaming at me not to, but curiosity overriding caution. The sound was louder out here, definitely coming from the direction of the water. I followed it through the trees, down the narrow path that led to the small private dock I sometimes used. That's when I saw them. Figures, standing in the water along the shore, maybe 20 of them, all perfectly still. They were waist deep, facing toward my cabin, and in the moonlight I could see they were wearing clothes, old clothes, decades out of style. And they were dripping. water pouring off them in impossible quantities as if they'd just surfaced from a great depth. I should have run, should have gone back to my cabin, locked the door, and called for help. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating those still, silent figures. Then, as one, they all spoke, not to each other, to me, in perfect unison, creating a voice that seemed to come from the water itself. "Noah Dempsey, you heard the call. Why do you not answer?" My beam swept across their faces, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Their features were distorted, wrong somehow, as if they'd been underwater so long they'd started to change. Eyes too large, mouths too wide, skin with a pale, translucent quality that showed the veins beneath. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. "We are the answered," they replied in that terrible unified voice. "We heard the call and came below. We saw the city. We know the truth. And now we serve." "Serve what?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "The sound, the voice, the thing that speaks in deep places." They took a step forward, all moving in perfect synchronization. "It wants you, Noah. It has chosen you. You heard your name in the calling. You are marked." I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam shaking. "Stay away from me. We cannot touch you. Not yet. Not while you remain on dry land." Another synchronized step forward. Water sloshed around their waists, but their movements created no ripples, no disturbance on the surface. "But you will come, eventually. Everyone who hears the call returns to the water. It's only a matter of time." "I'm not going anywhere near that lake," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. The figures tilted their heads in unison, a gesture that was disturbingly inhuman. "You already serve it, Noah. You brought the listening devices. You let Tessa plant her ears in our waters. You helped it hear more clearly, and in return, it will show you wonders." "What kind of wonders?" I asked, against my better judgment. "Come and see," they replied. "Come below. Join us in the city beneath. Walk streets that exist outside of time. Hear the song that unmakes reality. Become something more than human." I backed up further, nearly tripping over a tree root. "You're insane. All of you." "We're enlightened," they corrected. "We know what you don't. We've seen what you can't, and we're trying to help you, Noah. The call doesn't come to everyone. You should feel honored." Before I could respond, they began to sink. All at once, they descended back into the water, still maintaining that perfect synchronization. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving only ripples that quickly smoothed into calm. I stood there, shaking, my flashlight beam dancing across empty water, until the sun started to rise. Only then did I work up the courage to go back to my cabin, pack a bag, and drive straight to Tessa's apartment in town. She answered the door in her pajamas, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside. "What happened?" I told her about the figures, the message, the way they'd moved in perfect unison. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with every word. "They came to me too," she said when I finished, "about 2 hours ago. 23 of them, standing in the parking lot outside my building. Same message, same movements." I thought I was losing my mind. 23? I asked. "There were 20 at my place." She nodded slowly. "I counted, and Noah, I recognized some of them. I pulled up those missing persons reports you sent me. The faces matched. Those figures, they're the people who disappeared from the lake over the past 5 years." My blood ran cold. They said they served the sound. They said they saw a city beneath the lake. I've been going through the recordings we made yesterday, Tessa said, gesturing to her laptop. And I found something. Listen. She played a file, and I heard the voices from the lake again. But this time, she'd isolated and enhanced certain frequencies, filtering out the chaos until individual words became clear. A city of echoes, streets of sound, where voices never die, only change, only grow, only spread. It's not random, Tessa explained. There's a message in the voices, a description of something. And based on what you and I both saw tonight, I think those people, those things in the water, they're telling the truth. There is something down there, something that's been calling people for years, maybe decades. Or longer, I said. Tessa, what if this isn't new? What if it's been there forever, at the bottom of these lakes? The Ojibwe have stories about water spirits, about places where you shouldn't swim or fish because something lives there. What if they weren't just stories? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I need to show you something else. I've been researching similar phenomena, unexplained sounds from bodies of water around the world. And I found a pattern. She pulled up a map on her computer, showing locations marked with red dots across North America and beyond. These are all places where people have reported hearing voices from water. Lakes, mostly, but some rivers and even a few ocean sites. And look at this. She zoomed in on Minnesota. 27 lakes in our state alone have reports dating back over 100 years. And they're all connected? I asked. I don't know, but the descriptions are similar. Voices calling names, equipment failures, missing people whose bodies are never found, and she pulled up another document. Geological surveys showing unusual depth readings, places where the bottom of the lake seems to shift, to go deeper than it should. I thought about the hydrophone depth reading we'd seen yesterday. 240 feet in a lake that was supposed to max out at 75. You think there's actually something down there, a physical place? I think there's a connection between these lakes that we don't understand, Tessa said carefully. Something that exists in the deep places, linking them together. And I think whatever's doing the calling, whatever built this city those things described, it's using the lakes as access points. Access to what? I asked. Our world, she said simply. And I think every time someone answers the call, every time someone goes into the water and doesn't come back, it gets stronger. We sat in silence, the weight of what we were discussing settling over us. Finally, I asked the question we'd both been avoiding. So, what do we do? We need to go back to the lake, Tessa said. In daylight, with backup and better equipment. We need to map this thing, understand its boundaries, figure out how it works. Are you insane? I demanded. Those things came to our homes, Tessa. They're watching us. And they said, I'm marked, whatever that means. Going back out there is suicide. Maybe, she agreed. But what's the alternative? We run, hide, and what happens when it calls someone else's name? When the next curious fisherman or brave teenager hears the voice and goes to investigate? We're rangers, Noah. This is our jurisdiction, our responsibility. She was right, and I hated that she was right. Fine, but we're not going alone. We need backup, real backup, armed if possible. The DNR doesn't arm rangers except for law enforcement situations, Tessa pointed out. Then we find someone who is armed, a deputy, state patrol, hell, I'll call the National Guard if I have to. Because if we're going back out on that lake, I want someone with us who can fight back if those things decide to climb into our boat. Tessa nodded. Agreed. I'll make some calls, see if I can get support from the county sheriff. In the meantime, stay out of the water. Don't even go near the shore, and if you hear the voice again, Don't answer, I finished. Trust me, I learned that lesson. But as I left Tessa's apartment and drove back to my cabin in the morning light, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. That by hearing my name spoken from those depths, by bringing recording equipment to listen more closely, I'd already answered the call in a way I didn't fully understand, and that eventually, willingly or not, I'd find myself walking into those dark waters to see what waited below. 2 days later, we assembled a team. Tessa had convinced the county sheriff that we needed to investigate the unusual activity on Vermilion Lake, and after some back and forth about jurisdiction and liability, they agreed to send 2 deputies out with us. She'd framed it as a potential dumping site investigation, illegal disposal of hazardous materials that might explain the atmospheric disturbances and equipment failures. It wasn't entirely a lie. Something was down there, and it was definitely hazardous. The deputies were both young, mid-20s probably, and treated the whole thing like an easy overtime opportunity. Deputy Marcus Reeves kept making jokes about lake monsters, while his partner, Deputy Sarah Kim, spent most of the ride out checking her phone and looking bored. They wouldn't be bored for long. We returned to the same spot where Tessa and I had lost the hydrophones. She'd brought new equipment, including a sonar unit powerful enough to map the lake bed in detail. The plan was simple: get accurate depth readings, do a sonar sweep of the area, and document anything unusual. Then we'd leave, file a report, and let someone with more resources figure out what to do next. That was the plan anyway. Depth reading is 72 feet, Tessa announced, checking her equipment. Consistent with the charts. That's good, right? Deputy Kim asked. Means your equipment was malfunctioning before. Maybe, Tessa said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. Let's run the sonar sweep, I suggested. See what's actually down there. Tessa activated the sonar, and we watched as the display built up an image of the lake bed. At first, it looked normal. Rocky bottom, some vegetation, a few sunken logs. Then the image started to change. That's not right, Tessa muttered, adjusting the settings. The resolution is breaking up. The sonar image flickered and distorted, showing what looked like geometric patterns on the lake bed, straight lines and perfect angles that couldn't be natural. And in the center of it all, a depression. Not just a depression, a hole. A perfectly circular opening in the lake bed that went down, down, down into darkness that the sonar couldn't penetrate. How deep is that? Deputy Reeves asked, leaning over Tessa's shoulder. I don't know, she admitted. The sonar can't find the bottom. It's like it just goes forever. That's when we heard it. All 4 of us, at the same time. A voice echoing across the still water, calling our names. Not just mine anymore, all of us. Noah, Tessa, Marcus, Sarah, come closer. We've been waiting. Deputy Kim jumped, nearly dropping her phone into the water. What the hell was that? Stay calm, I said, though my own heart was racing. It's what we came to investigate. You knew about this, Reeves demanded. You knew something was out here calling people's names. We suspected, Tessa said. That's why we needed backup. The water around our boat began to smooth out, forming that familiar circle of unnatural calm. And from the depths, the voices grew louder, multiplying until it sounded like hundreds of people speaking at once. Why do you bring weapons? Why do you come with iron and fear? We only want to show you, to teach you, to bring you home. Deputy Reeves had his hand on his service weapon now, his earlier joking demeanor completely gone. Dempsey, I think we should leave. Right now. Agreed, I said, reaching for the ignition. Tessa, pack up the... The engine died, not just stopped, died completely, like someone had cut all power to it. And this time my backup radio died too, and both deputies' radios, and every electronic device on the boat simultaneously went dark. "No, no, no," Tessa was muttering, frantically checking her equipment. "This is a Faraday-protected system. Nothing should be able to interfere with—" The sonar display flickered back to life. But instead of showing the lake bed, it was showing something else. An image. No, a map. A three-dimensional map of something vast and intricate, like a city built in layers, going down and down through the depths. And in that city, I saw figures moving. Hundreds of them, thousands, all walking the same streets, all facing the same direction, upward, toward the surface, toward us. "Oh my God," Deputy Kim whispered. "What is that?" "The city," Tessa said, her voice barely audible. "It's real. It's actually real." The voices from the water changed tone, becoming more insistent, more demanding. "You've seen it now. You know. You cannot unknow. Come down, come see, come join the ones who serve the sound. Come, become part of the symphony. Come, let us show you how the world really works, beneath the surface, beneath the lies, beneath the thin veneer of reality you call normal." And then the boat lurched. Not from waves or wind. There was no wind. It lurched as if something massive had bumped it from below. Deputy Reeves had his gun out now, pointing it at the water. "What was that?" Another lurch, harder this time. Something was circling us, something big enough to rock a 20-foot patrol boat. "Everyone stay calm," I said, grabbing life jackets and throwing them to the deputies. "Put these on, now." "Why?" Kim asked, but she was already strapping it on. "Can that thing, whatever it is, can it capsize us?" Before I could answer, something broke the surface about 50 yards from our boat. At first, I thought it was a person. A head, shoulders, arms reaching up out of the water. But as it rose higher, I realized it wasn't one person. It was dozens of people, standing on each other's shoulders, forming a living tower that climbed higher and higher into the air. And they were all those same figures from the shore. The changed ones, the served ones, the ones who'd answered the call. "Jesus Christ," Reeves breathed, his gun shaking in his hands. The tower of bodies swayed in the breeze. No, not swaying. Moving, deliberately, bending toward our boat like a terrible flower seeking sunlight. And they spoke, all of them at once, creating a voice that seemed to come from everywhere. "You cannot kill sound, you cannot shoot echoes. We are beyond flesh now, beyond pain, beyond death. We are the voice given form. And you have been chosen to join us." More towers began rising from the water, surrounding our boat. 10, 15, 20 of them, all made of intertwined bodies, all bending toward us. "Screw this," Reeves said, and opened fire. The gunshots were deafening in the silence of the lake, and I saw at least 3 of his rounds hit the nearest tower. But the bodies didn't react. They didn't bleed or fall or show any sign they'd been struck. The bullets passed through them like they were made of water. "Stop shooting!" Tessa yelled. "You're wasting ammo." But Reeves was panicking now, emptying his clip into the towers, while Kim fumbled for her own weapon. And all the while, the towers grew closer, bending over our boat until they blocked out the sun. That's when I saw something that made me understand, finally, what we were really dealing with. As the bodies in the towers pressed closer, I could see through them. Not metaphorically, literally see through them, like they were made of glass or ice. I could see the water behind them, the sky beyond them. They weren't solid. They were sound given shape, vibrations in the air and water forming the illusion of physical bodies. "They're not real," I shouted. "Not in the way we understand real. They're acoustic phenomena, sound waves creating physical effects." "That doesn't help us," Kim yelled back. But it did, because if they were sound, then maybe we could disrupt them. I grabbed the air horn we kept on board for emergencies and blasted it directly at the nearest tower. The effect was immediate. The bodies in the tower shuddered and distorted, their forms wavering like a bad TV signal. The voice coming from them broke up, fragmenting into static and noise. "Do that again!" Tessa shouted, understanding instantly. I hit the air horn again, and this time the tower collapsed, the bodies falling back into the water and dissolving into ripples. But the others were still closing in, and I couldn't hit them all at once. "Everyone make noise," I yelled. "Shout, bang on the boat, anything." We all started yelling and banging on the sides of the boat, creating a cacophony that disrupted the towers. One by one, they wavered and collapsed, the bodies dissolving back into the water they'd come from. And as the last tower fell, our electronics suddenly came back online. The engine roared to life, the radios crackled with static, and Tessa's equipment lit up with data. "Go!" she shouted. "Go now before they regroup." I slammed the throttle forward, and we shot away from that spot, racing toward the shore while the water behind us churned and roiled with movement. I could see shapes forming beneath the surface, trying to coalesce into new towers, new manifestations. But we were moving too fast, creating too much noise with the engine and the wake. We didn't stop until we reached the dock at the ranger station. All four of us practically fell out of the boat, gasping and shaking, and stood on solid ground like it was the most precious thing in the world. "What the hell was that?" Reeves demanded, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it's been down there for a long time, and it's getting stronger." Deputy Kim was already on her radio, calling for backup, while Tessa secured her equipment and pulled the data cards from her recorders. "I got everything," she said. "Video, audio, sonar data. It's all recorded." "Good," I said, "because no one's going to believe us without proof." But even with proof, I wasn't sure anyone would believe us, because what we'd witnessed out there didn't fit into any category of known phenomena. It was something new, or maybe something very old that humanity had forgotten. Over the next week, Tessa and I compiled our evidence and presented it to every authority we could think of. The DNR, the Sheriff's Department, state environmental agencies, even a professor of acoustics at the University of Minnesota. The responses ranged from skepticism to outright dismissal. The most common explanation offered was mass hallucination brought on by exposure to infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that can cause anxiety, nausea, and even visual hallucinations. The towers of bodies, they said, were probably just our minds misinterpreting normal lake phenomena under stressful conditions, but that didn't explain the sonar data showing the city beneath the lake. It didn't explain the depth readings that went far deeper than the lake should go. And it definitely didn't explain how all four of us experienced the same hallucination simultaneously. Eventually, the DNR closed Vermilion Lake to all recreational use, citing environmental concerns pending further investigation. It was the best outcome we could hope for, keep people away from the lake until someone figured out what to do. But I know the truth. They didn't close the lake because they believed us. They closed it because they didn't know what else to do. Because admitting that something genuinely unexplainable exists in one of Minnesota's most popular lakes would cause panic and destroy the tourism industry. So they buried it. Called it a temporary closure for water quality testing, and told people like me and Tessa to keep our mouths shut if we valued our careers. I quit the DNR 3 months later. So did Tessa. We both knew we couldn't keep working for an organization that would ignore something this important, this dangerous, just to protect the bottom line. Deputy Reeves quit the Sheriff's Department too. Last I heard, he'd moved to Arizona, about as far from major bodies of water as you can get in the continental U.S. Deputy Kim stayed on the force but transferred to highway patrol. She told me she can't even look at a lake anymore without feeling sick. As for Vermilion Lake, it's still closed. Officially for water quality issues, though the testing has never revealed anything unusual. But sometimes, late at night, people in the area report hearing voices echoing across the water, hearing their names being called from the darkness. And sometimes, those people don't come home. I'm writing this from Colorado now, far from Minnesota's lakes. I work in land management, dealing with forests and mountains. Solid ground, no water deeper than a creek. It's safe. Or at least I tell myself it is. But I still dream about that day on the lake. About the towers of bodies bending over our boat. About the map on the sonar screen, showing that impossible city stretching down into depths that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, in my dreams, I hear the voice again, not calling my name anymore, just whispering a single word over and over. Soon. I don't know what it means. I don't know if the thing in Vermilion Lake is unique, or if there are others like it in deep waters around the world. I don't know if it's growing stronger or if closing the lake has contained it somehow. But I do know this. If you ever find yourself on a lake after dark, and you hear something calling your name from the water, don't answer. Don't even acknowledge you heard it. Because whatever's down there, whatever lives in those deep places between the world we know and the one we don't, it's patient. It's been waiting for a long time. And it can wait a little longer, just not forever.